Good evening. Welcome to Decision New Brunswick 2020. Thank you so much for joining us as we guide you through this provincial election. I'm Sarah Ritchie. I'm your host for this evening. Our team here at Global News is spread out across New Brunswick tonight, ready to bring you the very latest from the victory parties to the concession speeches and everything in between. We're broadcasting live this evening on the main network and on the Global News app on your phone or TV. We're also streaming live online, so if you need to run an errand tonight or leave the house, we have got you covered. Our team coverage tonight includes reporters with all the main party leaders. Silas Brown is in Quispamsis with PC Leader Blaine Higgs. Shelley Steeves is in Fredericton at Liberal Leader Kevin Vickers' headquarters. Callum Smith is also in the capital tonight. He's standing by with Green Party leader David Coon, and Travis Fortnum is just across town with People's Alliance leader Chris Austin. And I am thrilled to welcome back to our broadcast Laurie Turnbull, a political science professor and the director of the School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University. Laurie's joining me from Ottawa this time around. Also in Ottawa, our chief political correspondent David Aiken is keeping an eye on each of the 49 races underway. Back in Fredericton, we find our global national correspondent Ross Lord and University of New Brunswick political science professor Don Wright. They will be watching some of those key ridings and trends for us. And also joining us tonight, our own Tracy Tong, anchor of Global News at 11. Tracy and our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson will provide a little bit of national perspective as things unfold this evening. Now, before the results start to pour in, just a quick explanation about what you're seeing here. If you're watching online, you'll be able to click onto your riding for updated results at any time. But for those of you watching on TV or on the app, you can see the L frame here on your screen. This is where we're going to show you live results as they're reported by Elections New Brunswick. So on the bottom of your screen, you can see the overall standings. Remember that each party is trying to get to 25 seats. That's majority territory. And along the side, you will see results for each of the 49 ridings. Now, when this campaign began just 28 days ago, the Progressive Conservatives held 20 seats, as did the opposition Liberals. The People's Alliance had 3 MLAs, and so did the Greens. There was 1 independent MLA, and 2 seats were vacant. Now, this may feel like a bit of déjà vu for New Brunswickers. After all, it was not quite 2 years ago, September 24th, 2018, that we last headed to the polls. That election day was filled with historic firsts and surprises, and a lot has happened since then. Let's catch you up. Election night 2018 brought 2 leaders with 2 victory speeches, 2 third-party leaders celebrating historic gains, and 2 scenarios for how things could play out. David Coon, for the first time, was heading to the legislature with 2 Green Party colleagues.
They voted for change. They voted for change, not the status quo.
The upstart People's Alliance Party took 3 seats of its own, with leader Chris Austin celebrating a potential power alliance.
This is exciting, but you know, it's a victory moment, but there's work to be done. We got to roll up our sleeves and make this work.
Brian Gallant's Liberal Party was reduced to just 21 seats, well shy of the 25 needed to form a majority government. Blaine Higgs and the Progressive Conservatives had 22, and New Brunswick had its first minority government in nearly a century. Both leaders claimed victory.
I know some New Brunswickers may be wondering what's next. This is something that has not been seen in a generation. I will tomorrow meet with the Lieutenant Governor. I will discuss with her my plans to do everything I can to work collaboratively with the other political parties to ensure that we're able to pass legislation, to ensure we're able to make investments that will better the lives of the people of New Brunswick.
We know the tasks that lie ahead. If we approach them together with our province, first in our hearts, then our task will be accomplished.
But the path to legislative stability was never smooth for Gallant. The Premier tried to form government, electing a speaker and presenting a throne speech that failed to pass a confidence test. With 1 more seat than the Liberals and a working agreement with the People's Alliance, Blaine Higgs took his proposal to the Lieutenant Governor and asked to form government. He was sworn in as Premier on November 9th, 2018. The last 2 years, the PCs have negotiated to get enough votes to survive. Gallant stepped down as leader in February 2019, with Kevin Vickers taking over 2 months later. But the Liberal leader has never earned a seat in the House. It appeared his chance would come in 2020, after the death of PC MLA Greg Thompson in September 2019, and then Gallant's resignation as MLA in October. But those seats have remained vacant ever since, with Higgs refusing to call by-elections that could jeopardize his government. Even without a vote, the makeup of the House did change in February this year, when Deputy Premier Robert Gauvin left the PC caucus to sit as an independent.
If you have to flip-flop like that and play with people's lives like that to do politics, I don't want to do anything with any politician.
The party's only francophone MLA left over the PC plan to reform healthcare and close rural emergency rooms. Premier Higgs managed to survive one more confidence vote by passing a budget in March, just one day before COVID-19 was declared a global pandemic. You may remember from 2018 that New Brunswick has tabulator machines on Election Day, and that means results start to come in very quickly. And as you can see on the bottom of your screen, they've already started to come in. The Progressive Conservatives out to an early lead, leading and elected in 7 ridings so far. The Liberals trailing with 3. All right, today is the country's first general election in this pandemic. Blaine Higgs is hoping the approval ratings that he earned during the COVID crisis will translate at the ballot box. Legislature reporter Silas Brown takes a look at how we got here and what's happened in the campaign.
The options were clear: make a deal or go to the polls. The 4 party leaders walked into the cabinet room in mid-August with that in mind. Their goal, to reach an agreement that would allow the PC minority government to survive until the next fixed election date, or the end of the pandemic. Then the Liberals walked out.
It's been rough, and as I say, continually reminded that if we did not come to agreement, that he would call an election by the end of closing day, today, Friday. This was negotiation with a gun to our head.
The PCs refused to continue talks with just the Greens and the Alliance. After taking the weekend to think it over, PC Leader Blaine Higgs called the snap election.
It's completely my decision. I'm the one that's here today, being the Lieutenant Governor. I'm the one that asked permission to dissolve the legislature, and I'm the one that had to weigh all of the facts leading up to this discussion today.
It kicked off a campaign like no other. No shaking hands, no large indoor events, lots of masks and hand sanitizer. But the stakes are the same as any election. For the PCs, the pitch to voters is stability. Give them a majority to continue the plan of the last 2 years.
To bring a focus on the fact that, wow, here's a government that actually does what it said it would do. Here's a government that didn't promise a whole bunch of new things to get elected.
The Liberals are led by rookie leader Kevin Vickers, former Sergeant-at-Arms of the House of Commons. His party's appeal to voters is to transform the economy and protect rural and francophone New Brunswickers from the specter of PC service cuts.
Under Blaine Higgs, our people have been divided. Divided between Anglophones, Francophones, and Indigenous people. Between North and South, between urban and rural communities.
David Coon is pitching that the Greens are the only party willing to do the work to represent the entire province.
Our vision for a beautiful province that puts the well-being of people and our communities at the heart of government decision-making without undermining the environment on which we utterly depend.
Chris Austin and the People's Alliance are asking for another minority government in which they hold the balance of power.
And we're going to ensure that in a minority government, past September 14th, we're going to get things done for the people of New Brunswick. Thank you very much.
Each party hopes this unusual campaign has convinced voters they're the best fit to lead the province into the second wave of this pandemic.
All right, some more early results to talk about this evening. The PCs now leading and elected in 16 ridings. The Liberals trailing at 11. The Greens are leading and elected in 2. So I just took a look at where that was. So Megan Mitten's riding and Kevin Arsenault, they are both leading at this point. It's very early on, though. Not a lot of polls reporting, and Chris Austin is leading in his riding at this moment as well. So want to have a look at some more of those early results if we can. Edmundston Madawaska Centre JC Damore is leading as of right now, but only 4 of 15 polls are reporting so far. That's a huge lead for him at this point, though. Southwest Miramichi Béduvin, another no change here. So Jake Stewart is leading at this point. He's the incumbent. So having a look at what's happening across the board, it really does seem like the incumbents are out to early leads. So Ted Fleming, the former health minister, out to a lead in Rothsay this evening. 1 of 10 polls reporting there. We will have a lot to watch for in St. Croix as well. This is a riding which was vacant. It was Greg Thompson's riding before he passed away. in September of last year. The Progressive Conservatives will look to hold on to this one. So these are very early results so far, but it is looking good for the Progressive Conservatives at this point. I want to bring in Lori Turnbull. She is the director of the School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University. Lori, this was a calculated risk for Blaine Higgs to date. He is pretty much gambling here on a majority government tonight, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's not going in this because he wants another minority. That said, I mean, there's a minority and there's a minority. When he went into this, he was in the most, tense, kind of vulnerable situation he could possibly be, in the sense that he was tied with the Liberals for 20 seats. He was facing 3 by-elections, which could have actually put him in a worse situation relative to the Liberals. So I think his calculated risk is an understandable one from his perspective, in the sense that he didn't want to kind of go on and maybe run the risk that he would lose some of those by-elections and then actually be in a deficit with respect to the Liberals. But yeah, I mean, he's not going into this because he wants to come out roughly where he is now. He's going into it because he wants to get that majority so that he can go through with a post-COVID plan for rebuilding without having to negotiate with any other party. And although there's been a lot of positive reflection on how he's done as premier during the COVID era and how the minority government has performed, I think, yeah, he's not messing around. He's going into this for a majority tonight.
Okay, thanks for your perspective on this, Lori. We will come back to you throughout the evening. Right now, I want to draw your attention back to the bottom of the screen. The Progressive Conservatives leading and elected now in 25. That is the magic number. That's majority territory, and it's exactly what Lori was just talking about. It's where they want to be. Let's take a look at some of the places where the Progressive Conservatives are leading this evening. So St. Croix, as we talked about, this is one they would look to hold on to. It was a vacant seat, but it was theirs before Greg Thompson passed away. Carleton York is a seat that they would love to have as well. Richard Ames out to a 913 vote lead, so less than half of the polls are reporting here so far. Carleton Victoria, so Margaret Johnson out to 165 vote lead over the Liberal incumbent Andrew Harvey. Not half the polls reporting here either, so we will keep our eye on this. These are the early vote totals as of right now. So here's the historic party totals. This is something we're going to keep our eyes on as we go throughout the evening. If you can see there in 2018, the PCs wound up with 32% of the popular vote. They actually lost to the Liberals by 6 points. But that Liberal vote was so concentrated in the northern part of the province that they weren't able to win more seats than the PCs. That's a huge shift already for the PCs so far tonight. 10 points over where they landed in 2018. And I want to bring David Aiken in to talk more about that. He's our chief political correspondent. David's tracking all of the results. And David, if you have a look at the results that we have so far, these are very early. What needs to shift for the PCs is that they need to move into territory where they were not in 2018, right?
Absolutely. And in any New Brunswick election, I don't care which one it is, here's the game plan. There's a line that runs diagonally through the province, from the northwest right down to the southeast around Moncton. The blue, this is the 2018 results you're looking at, 2018, right there. So what do we have on the bottom end of that line, the south end? A lot of blue. That's the Progressive Conservatives, of course. It's really the English-speaking part of the province, or most English speakers. On the northern half of that line, all the red stuff, that's Liberals, more French speakers above that. And as you can see, that's where the Liberals had their success in 2018. 2 other parties, though, really had a big nights in 2018. The Green Party on the map, they're green, of course, in Memramcook, Trantramar, Kent South, and Kent North, rather, and Fredericton South. That's where the leader is. And the purple is the People's Alliance in New Brunswick. Chris Austin right in the middle. So remember I said that the PCs want to push north. They're at the majority right now, leading in 25 ridings. Where might they be? Well, I'll tell you, they're doing exactly what we said. They have pushed north into Freddie York. That was a PA riding. Right now, Ryan Cullens has 755 votes compared to incumbent Rick Desaulniers, who is right now at 367. Let's close that back, and let's take a look where else something is happening. I'm going to go down to St. John, right in the middle of it, St. John Harbour. That was a close win for the Liberals last time. There's no incumbent, and right now the Progressive Conservatives doing very well. People's Alliance not so well. 260, the PCs in the lead in St. John. Let's take a look at some surprising results in Moncton, or surprising in this sense. Right there in Moncton East, Monique Leblanc is the Liberal incumbent. This now, again, is PCs pushing into sort of more French-speaking parts of the province. Right now, Daniel Alain is leading with 1586. That's a pretty good lead right now. He has 1586 votes versus 1240. So again, just to go back to that theme, look at the blue. It's pushing north right now. Blue pushing north. Kevin Vickers and the Liberals, they need to see the red start to push south. Right now, it looks like not a bad night. We don't have Fredericton South, just to come back to a leader before we leave you there, Sarah. Right there, that is David Coon's riding. He is right now, well, it's 4-3. 4 votes to 3 votes. You're going to see that kind of result early in the night. So Coon's down. It's kind of like a hockey game, 4-3. He needs a couple more goals if he hopes to pull this off. Back to you, Sarah.
Yeah. Absolutely, David. And just a note on Fredericton South, we do expect the polls will close there a little bit later. Actually, they opened about a half an hour late. So Elections New Brunswick said that's one of 6 ridings where the results will start to trickle in a little bit later. Having a look at the ticker at the bottom of your screen, the PCs are now moving into that comfortable majority territory. So they're now leading and elected in 27 seats. Let's show you the first riding where they have elected an MLA. That is in Southwest Miramichi, Bay-du-Vamp. Jake Stewart will return to the legislature. We are willing to call that one with a pretty wide margin, more than 1,000 votes here so far. Having a look now at where the Liberals are leading. So Tracadie-Shyla is traditional Liberal territory, and Keith Chason will be looking to return to the legislature. He's got about a 1,200 vote margin there. Shediac Bay Dieppe was the safest Liberal seat in the province in 2018. That was Brian Gallant's riding. Now Robert Gauvin is an interesting story. He used to be the PC Deputy Premier, running there for the Liberals. Roger Melanson, another Liberal seat that we expect could be quite safe here this evening in Dieppe. He has just a 109 vote lead so far, though, so very early results here. Carleton Victoria, the PCs are leading by just over 200 votes. So Andrew Harvey with the Liberals is behind in Carleton Victoria, as David mentioned. Some of the ridings that the PCs are looking to push north into. So the PCs currently leading in 23 ridings, elected in 3. The Liberals elected in 2 and leading in just 15. They will need to see that number go up if they want to form government tonight. The Greens are leading in 4 and the People's Alliance in 2. This is where your popular vote is shaken out so far. And again, as we mentioned last time, the Liberals won the popular vote in 2018. So watch for a big win for the Progressive Conservatives if these numbers hold up, if they are able to keep this percentage of the popular vote. I want to send things over to Fredericton, where Ross Lord and Don Wright are standing by. Ross.
Thank you, Sarah. A lot of results already, and as you've noted, the PC's out to a lead. I can't help but think back 2 years ago. A lot of similarities. That one ended up in almost a dead heat. Yeah. This one perhaps not quite the same. But one of the similarities is that things, again, seem to be breaking along language lines. Liberals, Francophones, PCs, Anglophones, Greens, and People's Alliance in the mix as well. But what is more extreme about that language divide, and why is it worrisome?
Well, look, it's not a good thing to have a liberal north, a French-speaking north, and an English-speaking conservative south. You want parties to cohere around policy, around ideas, around platforms, not cohere around language. Sir John A. Macdonald, and I realize Sir John A. Macdonald is not very popular right now, but we're going to breaking news?
We are going back to breaking news, and we will pick up on that thought again. But Sarah, you have some new news for us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ross and Don. Global News is now projecting a progressive conservative government this evening. These are very quick results. Blaine Higgs will be your premier. That much we know. The question will he be running another minority government, or will he get into majority territory? Let's head now to Quispamsis. Global's Silas Brown is there at PC headquarters this evening. And Silas, this is obviously the result the progressive conservatives would want, another government for them, but still remains to be seen if this is a majority or minority.
Well, exactly, Sarah. You're definitely right about that. Obviously, things have started to roll in pretty quick, and as we've seen results pop up on screen on the streams here at headquarters, there has been wave after wave of clapping. It's not particularly full in here, but it's a pretty good mood as people see that number for the PCs continue to climb. But will they get past 25? That's what they need here, and really, in some ways, a minority is no good for them. They're looking for that majority. Blaine Higgs has been very clear that most of the reason that we're in an election right now is so the PCs can get to that 25 majority in order to be able to govern more efficiently, as he says, and with stability. And that really has been the crucial pitch to voters here over the last 28 days. And it seems as if it might be paying off, but we're still waiting for them to see if they can push over that 25 mark. Sarah?
Thank you so much, Silas. That's Silas Brown at PC headquarters in Quispamsis, no doubt feeling pretty good there. Let's have a look at some of the places where the Progressive Conservatives could be picking up seats this evening. They're leading in Moncton East. This is Danielle Alain, and David referenced this earlier. Monique LeBlanc is trying to hold on to that seat for the Liberals. 6 out of 10 polls reporting, and he's got a 520 vote lead, so we'll keep our eyes on that one. Moncton South is another area where the PCs would like to take this seat. This was Kathy Rogers' seat. She's not reoffering, and so it's a bit of a wide open race, and you can see Greg Turner has opened it up by just about 500 votes there too. St. John Harbour, a very tight result here in 2018. The Liberals did manage to win this one. Now we want to see what will happen with this. Just 117 vote lead for Arlene Dunn at this point. And St. Croix, this was a vacant seat. It was Greg Thompson's seat, so it was considered to be pretty safe PC territory, and Kathy Baucus has opened up a more than 800 vote lead at this point. Fredericton, York is a place where the Progressive Conservatives would very much like to take a seat from the People's Alliance. Rick DeSonia is quite a bit behind at this point in time. Okay, so we've got early results here. PC's leading or elected in 26 ridings, and the Liberals are trailing at 18. It's not enough for them to form government at this point. Our Shelley Steeves is at Liberal headquarters in Fredericton tonight. And Shelley, this is not the result the Liberals obviously were looking for this evening.
No, absolutely not. This is not at all what people in this room were hoping to see tonight. The results, as you mentioned, are rolling in quite quickly. It's been a really, really challenging campaign for Kevin Vickers. He's really had a difficult time getting out and connecting with voters, especially amid COVID-19. He just didn't have the political experience here in New Brunswick and wasn't well known across the province. And because of COVID-19, he wasn't able to get out and do as much door knocking and that kind of thing. So his ground game just wasn't nearly as effective. Now, the Liberals were also working with a smaller pool of money when it came to fundraising. They weren't able to raise as much funds over the last year, so they had to do that kind of old-fashioned ground game where they were just simply calling up voters and hoping they would get out and cast their vote in support of them. And they weren't able to implement any kind of texting technology and that kind of thing. So it may have really put them behind the 8 ball. We're going to be watching very closely to see what happens in Kevin Vickers' own riding. Right now he's trailing. It's not looking good for him. If he can't win in his own riding, and with the results we're already seeing here tonight, it's really calling into question his political future, Sarah.
Absolutely. And Shelley, that is not a question that any leader wants to be answering on election night, is the question of their own political future. Here's where we're at so far. The PCs leading and elected in 26 ridings. That would be a gain of 6 for them if that holds. The Liberals would lose 2 if their numbers hold. So 18 is where they're leading and elected. The Greens holding steady at 3 so far. The Alliance are back by 1, just leading and elected in 2. The popular vote here, this is another key number. We are going to keep coming back to it all night. So the Progressive Conservatives are out to a pretty big lead here of 5 points over the Liberals, leading by 5 points, as I mentioned, in 39%. So here's a riding I really want to show you, because the People's Alliance are only leading or elected in 2, and one of them is Kevin Vickers' riding, and it is not close. Let's bring in Laurie Turnbull if we can here. Laurie, Michelle Conroy out to a more than 1,000 vote lead at this point over Kevin Vickers. You've got to think this is disastrous for him.
Yeah, this is absolutely not what he wanted. And I mean, we've had, if COVID hadn't happened, and I mean, lots of people are saying that if COVID hadn't happened, then lots of things. But I think he was the candidate who was lined up to be the one in Shediac-Bay-Dieppe. And if he had gotten into the legislature, then maybe he would have had an opportunity to build trust with voters and have a sense of a presence in the legislature, give us a sense of what he was like as opposition leader, and therefore a sense of what he would have been like as premier. But because he has been kind of shut out of the House, he was coming to voters this time running against an incumbent, which is always difficult. And I think that he just kind of, he wasn't able to make it happen, it looks like. And so then it makes it really difficult. The whole process, the whole question he's been given to voters, right, in the sense of, I'm the leader of the Liberals, but here is a premier who has a proven track record and even in a global pandemic. Even if you don't love Blaine Higgs, he's got something that you can measure him against, and Kevin Vickers does not. And so I think, here we are, right? But I mean, as far as what he can do now, I think the party is probably going to be looking at reinventing themselves and probably choosing a new leader sometime in the very near future.
Wow, a pretty unbelievable storyline. Here's something that's not a surprise, Lori. I want to show you one riding where the MLA has been re-elected. That is in Quispamsis. Blaine Higgs will be headed back to the legislature with a 60% of the vote there in his riding. It's early, but it's such a wide lead at this point that we're willing to say Blaine Higgs will be heading back to the legislature. So, Lori, if we can come back to you to talk about this a little bit more. I'm not sure if you're still here. Yes. Okay. So, Lori,
yes.
This is not a surprise for Blaine Higgs. You talked about him being kind of a known commodity and his leadership through the COVID-19 crisis. How much do you think that leadership has been a ballot box question for people today?
Oh, I think hugely so. Because, I mean, as a number of people have said, and a number of the opposition leaders have said too, what was the point of this election? It wasn't because the voters were absolutely dying to go to the polls here. It was because the premier was facing a particularly precarious situation in the legislature, and he had a sense, I think, of having to resolve that. But I think, I mean, for him, he wasn't necessarily, Blaine Higgs is not your typical politician, right? Not that he hasn't been elected before, he has, but he spent a lot of his career as a CEO. I think you see signs of that in Blaine Higgs, is in the way he approaches politics. He doesn't have a big, kind of charismatic brand. He's not a Justin Trudeau. He's in many ways, like he's very much an anomaly in today's politics, but he comes with a kind of, I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, even if you don't want to hear it. I'm going to tell you what we can afford and what we can't afford. I'm going to, and he's very much a straight shooter. And I think, definitely in an emergency situation, that kind of politics has really worked for him. And so now he's looking to make that formal transaction. He's saying, look, I've governed as a majority premier for the past few months, and maybe other people think I don't need a minority, but I'm looking to kind of make that formal right now.
Okay, thanks so much, Lori, for your perspective on this. So the Liberals trailing here, leading and elected in just 17 ridings, well shy of where they would have liked to have been. Let's take a look at some of the places where they are struggling tonight. Some of those ridings, Monique LeBlanc is not doing very well in Moncton East. She is behind by 788 votes to the PC candidate Danielle Alain. So that would be a loss for the Liberals. So would Moncton South, where Kathy Rogers has held this seat. She did not reoffer, and Greg Turner now appears to be taking a comfortable lead in Moncton South, with 3 polls left to report. In St. John Harbour, Arlene Dunn with a 511 vote lead over Alice McKim, so the Liberals trailing here as well. These are all seats they needed to hold on to, and they needed to make some gains, and that doesn't appear to be happening. In Fredericton North, the Liberal incumbent Stephen Horseman is now behind 2 others. So Luke Randall for the Greens has jumped out too, and just an 82 vote lead here. 4 polls left to report. We'll keep our eye on that one. It's very tight. Carleton Victoria is another place the Liberals needed to hold on to. Andrew Harvey, 6 points behind, so about 325 votes behind Margaret Johnson for the PCs right now. Still lots more results to come, but I want to send things back to Fredericton. Ross, you and Don Wright were talking about language before. We kind of cut you off to get that breaking news in here, but I will send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, it was well worth pulling away from us because boy, oh boy, a lot has changed here, and it's only a half hour after the polls closed. Personally, I'm not surprised Blaine Higgs is winning big. I'm not overly surprised the PCs have about 26 seats right now and could form a majority, but I am surprised that Kevin Vickers is not only losing his riding, but losing big time. What are you surprised at about what we're seeing right now?
Well, a couple of ridings. Fredericton North, it looks like, I think Stephen Horseman is not going to be elected. It's looking like a Green or a PC candidate there. And that was a seat that Liberals had to hold, Fredericton North. Miramichi, as you point out, the leader possibly going down to defeat. That is a crushing blow to the Liberal team tonight. Also Carleton Victoria, Andrew Harvey losing to a progressive Conservative. And it was those ridings the Conservatives had to win to form a majority, Fredericton North, Carleton Victoria, and they are, and the Liberals are losing them.
And these numbers will bounce around a bit, no doubt, but 17 Liberal candidates are leading in their riding, but the leader himself is not one of them. So, I mean, how disastrous is that?
Well, there's no other way to measure it than to say it's a complete disaster if these numbers hold up, and if he loses his seat, the Liberal Party will have to do some deep introspection, find a new leader potentially. Okay. It's not a good night for the Liberals so far.
All right. Thank you, Don. And Sarah, we'll throw it back to you.
Thanks so much, Ross. Okay, let's take a look at where the leaders are. They were just talking, Ross and Don were just talking about Kevin Vickers. So Miramichi is where he is trailing by more than 1,000 votes to the incumbent Michelle Conroy. And Miramichi, a bad night for him. Quispamsis, Blaine Higgs re-elected, no surprise here. Let's take a look at the other two leaders if we can here. Fredericton Grand Lake, Chris Austin is out to an early 1,300 vote lead. He's elected in his seat, so he will go back to the legislature. And David Coon is out to a 766 vote lead in Fredericton South. We do have some breaking news for you. Global News is now projecting a progressive Conservative majority government this evening, so Blaine Higgs will be the Premier. He will get that majority mandate that he had asked for 28 days ago. I want to go back to Silas Brown in Quispamsis this evening. He is at the PC party headquarters. And Silas, this is obviously the news the PCs were hoping for. How are things sounding and feeling in the room there tonight?
I mean, I wouldn't call it jubilation, but it would be a mix of excitement and relief in here. You know, the Premier earlier today, he spoke to reporters after he voted, and he was very at peace with how the campaign was run, and he sounded resigned to whatever happened was going to happen. He said he made his pitch. He made his pitch for stability, and he wasn't trying to, as he said, buy anybody's vote with taxpayer money, and it seems now that that has paid off. He's gotten the stable mandate that he wanted. And now really the question is, how high can they push it above 26? 26 is a pretty slim majority if we're really talking about this. They're still going to need to find a speaker, and there's always resignations and people who step down and vacancies that pop up. So this is definitely what they're looking for here, though, and I'm sure Higgs will be relieved here that he will not have to find a dancing partner in order to pass legislation and can start getting started or continuing the priorities that he has set out over the last 2 years, but with majority efficiency. Sarah?
Thank you so much, Silas. That's Silas Brown standing by at PC headquarters in Quispamsis at what will no doubt be a victory party this evening. Shelley Steeves is on the other end of the spectrum here at Liberal campaign headquarters. She's standing by with Kevin Vickers' campaign manager, Don Arsenault. Shelley.
Thank you, Sarah. Don, this is not the way that you were hoping for the night to go. What is your reaction so far to the results?
Well, there's no doubt we wanted to be a little bit tighter. We knew it was an uphill battle. You know, if you go just back a month ago, we were over 20% behind the government. And when Blaine Higgs called this unnecessary election that nobody wanted, it's pure political opportunism. So we expected that. It was a good politically strategic move. We get that. And I find it's unfortunate what we see here this evening. And but we did have a good campaign. We're very proud of the campaign we run. We've run a very responsible, positive campaign. You know, the leader, Kevin Vickers, he was the rookie on this campaign trail. All the other leaders, except for the NDP, they've been on this trail before. So it was trying to get to introduce the leader into New Brunswickers' home, and it was challenging under a pandemic because you're not doing the rallies, you're not doing these gatherings that we have throughout the province, and so it was a little bit challenging. But look, at the end of the day, we're very proud of the campaign we ran, and we'll see how the end of the night goes. But there's still some polls left, and if we can make it a little bit tighter in terms of not giving Blaine Higgs a majority government, if we can bring that back into a minority situation, I think will be positive for New Brunswick.
Now, right now, Kevin Vickers is trailing quite significantly in his own riding? What does that potentially mean for his political future?
Well, we'll have to have that conversation. Again, it's only 8:30, so let's wait to see how it all unfolds. But there's no doubt we knew from the get-go it was going to be a challenge in the Miramichi. Michelle Conroy, she has done well. She's connected into the community, into to the citizens and constituents. So that played a big factor with some of the numbers that we've seen so far. So, but again, as much as we can look at ourselves, I think we've done a good job trying to, in the best scenario that we can, to present a good platform to New Brunswickers in each of those ridings. And obviously, New Brunswickers are making some choices here. And, they've chosen, somebody that's been in front of the camera for the last 4 months each and every day because of the pandemic. And, he's taken a lot of the credit for what Dr. Russell and the rest of the cabinet, or the leaders, I should say, in the cabinet committee has made over the last several months. He was all by himself in front of that camera, and he made the campaign all about himself. So, but we trust New Brunswickers made a choice, and that's what we're seeing in the numbers.
It appears at this point that Vickers has not been successful in winning the seat in his riding. Just a couple of seconds, what's your initial reaction to that?
Well, I just find it unfortunate. Look, I look at, if I'm somebody from the Miramichi, I say you have the opportunity for the next premier. So obviously they seem to be thinking differently. And again, we're only 8:30, so let's give it another half hour, see where we're at.
Thanks so much, Don.
No problem.
Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Shelley. That's Shelley Steeves at Liberal Party headquarters. Some soul searching underway already tonight for the Liberals, you've got to think, with Kevin Vickers not winning his seat. So Michelle Conroy will return to the legislature as the People's Alliance MLA for Miramichi. That's a huge win for that third party. Another big win for a third party tonight. David Coon has won his riding in Fredericton South. And Fredericton is a bit of a battleground, a pretty interesting battleground for us this evening. I want to bring David Aiken back into the conversation. David, what are you watching for in Fredericton, in the capital?
Yeah. Well, what we're watching, of course, is where are these changes taking place all across the province? Where have the PCs picked up? Green's having not a bad night. They started the night with 320 right now. Remember, we talking about blue pushing north, and they've been doing that. Here's your 2018 map, right? And I guess one of the big ones is Memrem Cook. We're going to look at Fredericton in a second. Right now, there's a bit of a close race. Now, this is starting to wind up. Liberal Maxime Bourgeois is ahead of the Green incumbent, Megan Mitten, right now there. But Fredericton this is where there's been a lot of change, and maybe a lot of change in and around the ridings that are touching Fredericton. So let's bring up a little bit of that list, take in a closer look at the Fredericton ridings. Freddie West Hanwell, Dominic Carty's the incumbent. He's the education minister. Ran, of course, here as a New Democrat when he led the NDP and cratered, but running for the blue team seems to be much better for him. So he's coming back to the legislature, 53%. Then Freddie York, this is right now a riding change. Look at that, Rick Dosonier of the People's Alliance is in third place with 26%. He's the incumbent. This is a pickup for the PCs in Freddie York. Fredericton North, this was supposed to be a dogfight, and it kind of is, but not a dogfight with the Liberal in it. The Liberal incumbent, Stephen Horseman, well back at 18%. Right now, Luke Randall of the Greens has 37%. The PCs are in second spot. Freddie South, we just talked about that. David Coon seems to be a popular leader in New Brunswick. And let's not forget, Fredericton right now is also represented federally by Janica Atwin, who also ran in 2018 unsuccessfully for the Greens provincially. Freddie Grand Lake, Chris Austin's holding on. He's not going to be that consequential in the next legislature because it's a majority. It really doesn't matter what two votes for the PA or 4 votes from the Green really make a lot of difference right now. Blaine Higgs can pursue whatever legislative agenda he wants. So in that sense, good for the Greens. They did all right. They've increased their popular vote. The PA's popular vote has dropped. But again, the story of the night is Higgs sort of doesn't really care much about what the opposition is saying because he's got the hammer right now. Sarah?
All right, thanks so much, David. That's David Aiken keeping an eye on those riding by riding results for us. I want to bring Laurie Turnbull back into the conversation. Laurie, we just heard Don Arsenault, the campaign manager for Kevin Vickers, talking about the results as he's seen them. He's mentioned a couple times how early it is in the evening, but those results coming in so quickly with that tabulator machine. Kevin Vickers will not win his seat in Miramichi. What do you think his political future could possibly be at this point?
I think it's going to be really tough for him because, I mean, whether or not the government has a majority or a minority, the opposition leader has to be in the House. And this has been the first time that Kevin Vickers has had an opportunity to run, but he has not been elected. And so I think the party needs to figure out how they're going to rebuild going forward. And, Blaine Higgs is now going to be a 2-time premier, and the Liberals have to figure out how to win the next election. And if they're looking at that from the perspective of a leader who's not been able to resonate with voters enough to win his own seat, and obviously the challenges during this kind of election have been, unprecedented and very unusual. But at the same time, the party has to figure out how to go forward. And so I can't imagine that Mr. Vickers' political career has a lot of runway at this point. But we'll see what he says later on in the night.
So, Lori, this is a soul-searching moment for the Liberal Party for sure, but the fact that Kevin Vickers sort of walked into this role uncontested when he did, what does that mean for the Liberal Party and their ability to rebrand and just how much they need to change at this point?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever a great moment for a party if the leadership is not contested. You don't necessarily want 15 candidates because that's distracting, but you want a sense of a competition because it shows that the party is wanted and that there's a sense that the job is wanted and people are very interested in the outcome. But if you have someone to win without any kind of competition, then it's a bit lackluster and it doesn't create a lot of energy and buzz around the party. And so now I think they have to figure out, what are they going to do going forward? And it's going to be an interesting time to do that in a pandemic period, even in a post-pandemic period where parties are struggling to raise money. And but at the same time, I think there's going to be, as we see federally, there's going to be possibly really interesting conversations that will allow the parties to differentiate themselves. So federally, we see, potentially a really hard swing to the left for the federal government. The types of noises that we're hearing about the throne speech that is going to come next week could be, what they're talking about, a basic income. They're talking about changes to EI, to things like that, which potentially leaves a big road open for Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives to offer an alternative there. And so how will those kinds of ideological differences play out in the provincial jurisdictions, and how will the parties differentiate themselves? And so I think the realities of COVID and the post-COVID economic rebuilding have really put parties on a lot of pressure on them to define what do you think the role of government is in people's lives. And I think Blaine Higgs has obviously emerged as a leader in this time. And so how are the Liberals going to offer an alternative to that? That is their major question, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, Lori. Thanks so much for your perspective. So Lori just mentioned the federal Liberal Party. They are obviously going to be keeping a close eye on what's happening here tonight. Let's head over to our Toronto studio, check in with Tracy Tong, because she's keeping an eye on the national perspective for us this evening. Tracy.
Thanks for that, Sarah. You're absolutely right. The federal government watching this very closely, as are many provincial governments across the country. Really, a lot of things being put to the test tonight that haven't been done or seen before in Canada during COVID-19 that are going to be watched very closely. What to take from this election and how things are done in terms of the process and what not to do. And to break all of that down and how this affects all of us across the country, I want to bring in Mercedes Stevenson now, who's our Ottawa bureau chief. Hi there, Mercedes. How are you tonight?
Hi, Tracy. Great, thanks. How are you? I haven't seen a call this fast in a long time, so certainly a very exciting night for people who like to watch politics.
Absolutely. And let's talk about that. This call happening so quickly. Blaine Higgs and the PC is obviously able to get a really strong lead very early on. And we know that he came out strong talking about his performance in handling the COVID-19 pandemic. New Brunswick has seen very low infection transmission rates. They've also been able to really lead the country in terms of an economic recovery. So this result that we're seeing right now, what does this mean in terms of what New Brunswickers are saying?
Well, this is really the first test of an incumbent government, a test of how they performed during the pandemic. And obviously, what we're seeing tonight is resounding support in New Brunswick for that government. What message that sends across the country to other premiers who might be governing with a minority right now. For example, Premier Horgan out in BC. Well, it sends a message that voters aren't punishing people, at least in New Brunswick, for calling an election during a pandemic, that they were willing to hear Premier Higgs' call to give a majority. And that also could resonate here in Ottawa, because we certainly know the federal government have been saying they do not want an election, but they also don't want to look weak. They're governing with a minority. There's been a lot of speculation about whether the Liberals might try to go to the polls and look for a majority mandate going forward. This certainly at least would seem to reassure them that if New Brunswick is to be taken as an example, you won't necessarily be punished if people approve of what you've done during the pandemic. They might not mind going to the polls after all.
And we did hear Lori touch on this as well in her last hit. How does this translate then? How COVID really becomes, and COVID control really become a top election issue? And what do you think we will see over in BC, where there are reports tonight swirling that there could be a snap election?
Well, I've been hearing from sources in British Columbia for a few days now that Premier Horgan was leaning strongly towards that. And I know that our Richard Zussman, who's out there, has been hearing the same thing. He's our political correspondent in BC, who really has his finger on the pulse. That initially Horgan was sort of afraid to go there. Now, especially after watching this result, might be a lot more likely. It's been growing increasingly likely in recent days. And the question will be, does that resonate here in Ottawa as well? It's a unique situation in New Brunswick because there was a very low transition rate and because Premier Higgs had a very high approval rating. But this might embolden other governments to take significant chances or to roll out bold programs that they think people will respond to. It all depends on how they perceive how that government has governed throughout this pandemic. But it really is the only election issue right now. Everything else has dropped off the face of the earth as people wonder how to deal with a second wave and how to deal with that economic recovery and potential recession.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mercedes. We'll be back with more. Sarah, I'll send it back to you for now.
Thanks so much, Tracy. That's Tracy Tong for us in Toronto. Keeping an eye on the national perspective because, of course, there are a lot of eyes on New Brunswick tonight, the first jurisdiction in this country to go to an election in this pandemic. Take a look at where things are shaking out so far this evening. The PCs have gained 7 seats. They're leading and elected in 27 ridings as of right now. If these results hold, it is still early. The Liberals losing 3 if the results hold, back to 17 seats. The popular vote, the Liberals losing that one as well by 6 points. And this we have talked about all night is a very important marker for the Liberals. They won the popular vote last time and still didn't win more seats than the Progressive Conservatives. So they need to win by a wide margin in order to win more seats, and they just haven't done it tonight. Want to take a break here this evening. It is time for us to catch our breath. You're watching Decision New Brunswick. We have lots more to come right after this. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. Some quick results for us this evening, and we can tell you this evening there will be a progressive conservative majority government in New Brunswick. As of right now, the PCs are leading or elected in 27 ridings, the Liberals trailing at 17. The Greens are holding on in 3 ridings so far. Callum Smith is covering the Green campaign for us this evening. Before we get to Callum, actually, I want to show you where the Greens are leading. Let's take a look at those ridings. Kevin Arsenault in Kent North, so Kevin Arsenault, the incumbent MLA there, leading by about 950 votes this evening so far. In Memramcook Tantramar, Megan Mitten won this one in 2018 by a very narrow margin. She's leading by 389 votes at this point, with 3 polls left to report, so she's got to be feeling good about that so far. And in Fredericton South, David Coon will return as MLA, the leader of the Green Party, 3-time MLA at this point. As I mentioned earlier, Callum Smith is live at Green Party headquarters tonight in Fredericton. And Callum, this is good news for the Greens, but not overwhelmingly good news, because they were hoping to expand on their historic gains in 2018, and they haven't been able to do that so far.
That's just it, Sarah. Of course, it's very different at this point in the evening. Obviously, David Coon presumably is very pleased that he's returning to his seat in Fredericton South as the Green leader. But of course, with a majority government, the Greens or third party does not have as much control. We've requested several interviews with Mr. Coon this evening. He arrived here at the Rustico restaurant at about 7:45. He is watching very closely here. We'll bring you that interview as soon as we can. But again, Sarah, obviously, with Coon going back to the legislature, that presumably is good news. But a majority government means less control for the Green Party. Back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, it absolutely does, Callum. Thanks so much for that. So some tight races still yet to be resolved here this evening. Memramcook Tantramar, Megan Mitten still in a fight for holding on to her seat, so 243 votes ahead of the Liberal challenger there. In Fredericton North, Jill Green is just 372 votes ahead of the Green challenger Luke Randall, with 1 poll left to report. So a very close race, and it's very close to being called there too. In Moncton Centre, Rob McKee is in a tight race here, 309 votes ahead of the Green candidate. So the Greens runners-up in a couple of tight races so far this evening, which is pretty interesting. Carleton, Victoria is another tight race. Margaret Johnson is out to a 284 vote lead over incumbent Liberal MLA Andrew Harvey. So not good news for the Liberals in Carleton, Victoria. Better news in Miramichi Bay, Neguac, but they are only 500 votes ahead. So Lisa Harris, the incumbent there, just a handful of votes ahead with 6 polls left to report at this point. David Aiken is our chief political correspondent. David, how does COVID-19 affect getting out the vote? We've been talking about COVID-19 forming sort of the backdrop to everything that we've been talking about this evening. And I know you have some insight into how the parties normally would go about getting out the vote on a day like today.
Yeah, it's really good. And this is another reason why everyone in the country who's involved in politics, pundits, journalists like me, political operatives, we're looking at how it is all working in New Brunswick, not only from Election New Brunswick standpoint, and they've taken a lot of precautions to keep their workers and voters safe, but also how did the parties themselves go about campaigning? Normally, campaigns are all about one thing: knock on doors, write down a name, find your vote, get your vote out, drag them physically to a polling place on Election Day. That's what campaigns do. Identify your vote, get out the vote. But of course, on this one, a lot of campaigns couldn't do that physical contact. You couldn't do, not a lot of door knocking going on. So I know conservative campaigns, and this would include the Blaine Higgs' PC party, relying on technology more and more. Using your smartphone, send out some text messages. Are you a supporter of Blaine Higgs? Reply yes. Now, a lot of people got annoyed by some of that spam. I know David Coon, the Green leader, complained on Twitter a couple of days ago that provincial civil servants were getting texts on their government phones from the PCs. But in any event, it seems to have worked for the PCs. They didn't do a good job last time around getting their vote out. They've done a good job this time getting their vote out. But I want to talk a little bit more, too, as we take a look, and we just heard Callum talking over there in Fredericton South at David Coon's headquarters. The Green phenomenon in this country is really growing from New Brunswick. There's a center of activity in BC, of course, where Greens had 3 seats. And here they've got 3 seats. Maybe they might have 4 by the end of the night. But increasingly, not just here, but around the country, when people who vote Liberal are unhappy with the Liberals, normally they vote NDP. Well, obviously not New Brunswick. There's not a hint of NDP. But more and more people are thinking, Liberal voters, thinking about voting for the Green Party. And you mentioned one just a minute ago. I'll go to Moncton Centre. Look at this race right now. Carol Chin was leading at one point, the Green candidate. Rob McKee's the incumbent, 37.8%. Moncton Centre is another pretty safe Liberal seat. Liberals should be winning in Moncton. But if there are Liberal voters there who are going, I'm not so sure about Kevin Vickers, they didn't think about the Conservative Jean Poirier. They thought about Carol Chan in the Green Party. And there's other races like that where the Greens, even though they're not leading, they're doing relatively well. Let's bring up the popular vote, because I think that sort of illustrates how votes in this election and the last one continue to shift it to the Greens. In the last election, the Green Party had about 12% of the popular vote. This evening, they're at 15%. That's not bad. The People's Alliance in the last election, I think, was at 13%. They've now fallen back to about 9% of the popular vote. You're looking at today's election. And the PCs, obviously, just rocking it. There we go, right there. 39% for the PCs now, 32% in the last election. And the Liberals dropping, 38% popular vote last time, 34% now. But again, where are the votes shifting? Greens up, PCs up, PA down. May not be so relevant next time. And obviously the Liberals are going to have to do some reinvention. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, David Aiken in Ottawa for us this evening. Callum Smith is at Green Party headquarters, and he's got a guest with him. David Coon is standing by, ready to speak about the party's fortunes this evening. Callum, we'll send it to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm here with Green Party leader David Coon. Mr. Coon, congratulations on your re-election. First, I want to get your reaction on the Progressive Conservative majority government.
Well, it's what Blaine Higgs was looking for, and it looks like that's what the people of New Brunswick are going to give him. Fortunately, over the years, I've built a very strong working relationship with many of his senior cabinet ministers, and look forward to continuing to have influence on what his government will do. This is something that's really important to ensure that we address some of the biggest challenges that we're facing in New Brunswick, and I have no doubt that I'll continue to have that influence. We've seen that with the Premier, for example, his commitment now to addressing mental illness and mental health, and his commitment to addressing food security in our province. Those were things that my caucus and I had worked on long and hard, and this is why Blaine Higgs has gotten behind them.
Sure, but Mr. Coon, again, with a majority versus the minority that action happened under, how concerned are you that the Greens perhaps won't be heard?
Well, I'm not concerned. We will be heard. We're always heard. I demonstrated that when Brian Gallant had a majority and I was one Green in the entire Legislative Assembly, and I was heard. So our voice will be heard and we will make a difference.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. That's Green Party leader David Coon. Sarah, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you so much, Callum. Callum Smith at Green Party headquarters. You are watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. The polls closed in New Brunswick about an hour ago. We can already tell you that the Progressive Conservatives will form a majority government this evening. They are now leading and elected in 27 seats, so that's 2 seats above what they needed, the 25 being the magic number to get to majority territory. The Liberals trailing, leading and elected in just 17 seats as the results continue to come in this evening. Our Shelley Steeves is covering the Liberal campaign for us tonight from Fredericton, and she's standing by with their campaign co-chair. Shelley.
Hi, thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, so this clearly is not the way you wanted things to go tonight. And for the past 28 days, for the past 4 weeks, that Kevin Vickers has maintained that this was an unnecessary election. But really, clearly, the gamble has kind of paid off for Higgs. What is your reaction tonight?
Well, you're right. We didn't feel that it was the time for an election. But it wasn't time for an election for us, apparently. You know, we don't have as many seats as we were hoping for. But it's time to rebuild and move forward, and we're very excited to look forward to the future and see what that holds for us. And right now, it looks to be about 17 seats, but the night's not over, so we're not sure.
I know it's been a really challenging campaign for Kevin to get out there and get to know people. He's unknown politically speaking the province. Yeah. And amid COVID-19, that made it even more challenging for him to get out and connect with voters. Yeah. How hard has this whole process been on him? Because this is certainly not his background.
Of course, but I think that if you have the heart to serve and you want to be as a part of that leadership role, I think you have to go for it. And he felt that in his heart, and he was ready to go. Just like all the rest of the candidates, when you only have a few weeks, it's hard to get any sort of momentum, and I think Kevin sometimes could be in that boat as well. I know people would say, a little more energy, but if you just could get to know him, he is such a fabulous person. He is a good man, and when he asked me if I would be a part of this and be co-chair, I said yes, because I did believe in him. He's a lovely gentleman, but I do wish he had a little more time, just like the other candidates who really, they stepped up, they're brand new. We would have liked them to be able to get their faces out there more, but maybe next time.
So you just feel like people just didn't have a chance to get to really know the real him?
Yes, I would agree with that. And again, he ran out of runway. You only have so many weeks to campaign and get your face and your message out there, and it was very short.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
Back to you, Sarah.
Okay, thanks, Shelley. That's Shelley Steeves at Liberal Party headquarters. A look now at some of the very tight races, because as we said, the results are still coming in. In Memramcook, Tantramar, Megan Mitten has a 522 vote lead over the Liberal challenger here. She won this race by 11 votes last go round, so that's looking a lot better for her so far. Fredericton North. Jill Green for the PCs out to a 761 vote lead over the Green Party challenger. Stephen Horseman for the Liberals in third, so that's bad news for the Liberals. Better news here in Moncton Centre. Rob McKee has a narrow lead over Carol Chan. 2 more polls left to report in this one, a 403 votes separate the two. Rob McKee would be looking to hold on to that seat. Another Liberal incumbent in trouble tonight in Carleton, Victoria. Andrew Harvey is 396 votes behind Margaret Johnson with 3 polls left to report here. And in Miramichi Bay, Naguac, Lisa Harris has a 629 vote lead over the PC challenger Robert Trevors. 4 polls left to report. So still some results to come. Still some things could change. As of right now, it is a Progressive Conservative majority government, and they are leading and elected in 27 ridings so far tonight. Let's send things back to Fredericton and Ross Lord with Don Wright.
Thank you, Sarah. So PC majority after 2 years of minority. Obviously, Premier Blaine Higgs will have more control, more authority to do what he wants. People won't have to go through this again for another 4 years, right? It's mandatory here, I believe. So why aren't you smiling, Don? Oh, you're laughing. That's better.
Well, look, as a political scientist and as a citizen, I like minority governments because it forces the Premier, in this case, to work with the smaller parties, and voices are heard. Look, Chris Austin was right. When smaller parties hold a balance of power, people's votes, people's representatives matter.
Having said that, what did they really accomplish in the past 2 years? Not only the PCs, but the PCs in working with other parties.
Well, I think we had quite a functioning legislative assembly. The parties working together, there was less partisanship, less rancor. It was quite a pleasant change from the pointing fingers all the time, because of course it meant that Blaine Higgs had to work with the parties to find their support. And that's good for democracy, because it means you're not sending somebody to sit in the back benches. You're sending somebody who's actually going to be participating in the making of public policy.
So more authority for Blaine Higgs, less control or influence for the Liberals, less influence for the Greens, less influence for the People's Alliance. And as we say, people won't be going to the polls for another 4 years, and we have a feeling that a lot is going to happen in those 4 years. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ross. That's Ross Lord standing by in Fredericton this evening with political scientist Don Wright. Let's have a look at some of the areas where the Progressive Conservatives have stolen seats or gained this evening. In Moncton East, Danielle Alain is leading Monique LeBlanc. She's the incumbent for the Liberals. One poll left to report here, but with 757 votes separating the two, it's looking pretty good for Danielle Alain. In Moncton South, this was Kathy Rogers' riding in 2018. She did not reoffer. Greg Turner has a 654 vote lead over Tyson Milner here. This one looking pretty good for him with 2 polls left to report, so that appears to be a pickup for the PCs. Another pickup for them is in Fredericton North, and we've talked about this before. Stephen Horseman in 3rd place in his own riding. That's really bad news for the Liberals. And in Carleton, Victoria, Margaret Johnson is out ahead by just shy of 400 votes over Andrew Harvey. This one's still pretty close with 3 polls left to report, so we will keep our eye on some of these really tight races as the night goes on. The Liberals leading and elected in 17 seats, the Progressive Conservatives in 27. So Laurie Turnbull, I want to talk to you a little bit about what the legislature will look like now in New Brunswick. So Ross and Don were just touching on this a little bit as well. We saw, obviously, unprecedented cooperation between the parties during the COVID-19 crisis. There was this all-party cabinet committee struck by Blaine Higgs. He brought all of the leaders to the table, and they all helped to form policy as the province moved through the first wave of COVID-19. Now, we do know that Blaine Higgs has said, win or lose, he plans to bring back that all-party cabinet committee, but they won't have the same influence as they did in the minority situation, will they?
I mean, it's tough to say. Like, I think actually the fact that he convened that committee is a little bit off what some people try to, like, it's offside of the picture that some people try to paint of him as somebody who doesn't consult, very much a CEO's approach to politics where he makes decisions and he sort of lets people pick up the pieces. But I mean, I think the fact that he struck that committee is kind of a counter to that. But I mean, going forward, he has a majority in the legislature, but it's not as though the Liberals have been totally reduced here. I mean, there was a potential narrative where the Greens really ate into the Liberal vote and we had a very different party system going forward. But now we can see that actually, I think the narrative for this election as compared to 2018 is that vote splitting that happened in 2018 between the Progressive Conservatives and the People's Alliance. That didn't happen this time. You see the vote kind of coming back to the Progressive Conservatives. The Liberals still quite in a strong position, not with their leader elected, but still in terms of seats a strong position. The Greens kind of holding their own. And so, like, overall, the legislature hasn't changed a huge amount, but now Higgs has that kind of, he has the numbers he needs to be able to push through things. Now, that said, some are making the argument that the Greens have kind of held their own in terms of seats, but now lose quite a bit of influence because of the relative numbers. I'm not totally sure that that's true. Like, it strikes me that the reality of the pandemic meant that Higgs really governed as a majority government premier anyway. And so I'm not sure that the smaller parties really lose a whole lot in terms of influence. I think if Higgs is looking at how the smaller parties were able to hold on to something, 2018 wasn't a total anomaly. These two smaller parties actually do have a vote base here that has to be taken seriously. And so I think that Higgs will look at that and will have to, right, as he goes forward. What that means for that committee of the whole sort of thing, I'm not totally sure yet.
Okay, thank you so much for that analysis, Laurie. And we will be watching, to see what happens with that all-party cabinet committee and how the cooperation in the legislature changes or doesn't change as they head back. Let's take a look now at where things are shaking out so far. So a gain of 7 seats for the Progressive Conservatives with still some ridings too close to call. So leading and elected in 27, Liberals in 17, Greens holding steady with their 3 MLAs so far holding on to their ridings. The People's Alliance will drop back one, but a huge win for them as they take out Kevin Vickers in Miramichi. And the popular vote, David Aikens talked about this all night as well. The Progressive Conservatives with 39% of the popular vote, so a 4-point lead over the Liberals. The Greens have gained 3 points from where they were in 2018, so that's looking good. And the People's Alliance, as Lori was just referencing, have dropped back to 9% from about 13%. Okay, you are watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. We're going to take another break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more. New Brunswick 2020. I want to give you a live look right now at Quispamsis PC party headquarters there. We are waiting on Blaine Higgs to arrive, and when he begins to speak, we will bring you back here. Interesting to note, though, as we've been talking about all night, in the backdrop of COVID-19, everything looks different, and this is not your traditional victory party for one of these parties to be holding on a night such as this. They would normally have packed the place. Obviously, with physical distancing rules in place, they can't do that. So Blaine Higgs is expected to speak relatively soon. We will take you there when he does. First, though, want to take you to some of the results that we're keeping our eyes on for the People's Alliance, and this is where they have picked up a major storyline and a major seat for them. Michelle Conroy returns to the legislature. Kevin Vickers loses his own seat in Miramichi. That's a huge win for the People's Alliance. Their other win comes in Fredericton Grand Lake, where Chris Austin will return as a second-time MLA. Our Travis Fortnum is standing by this evening at People's Alliance headquarters in Fredericton. So Travis, it's a bit of a mixed bag for the People's Alliance, but one of the things that's been really interesting to watch in their campaign is that Chris Austin really hasn't been pitching to be the premier of this province. He has been pitching instead to be someone who holds the balance of power in a minority legislature.
Exactly. So it's a bit of a mixed mood here. Obviously, people are pretty excited for that big win to have incumbent Michelle Conroy take down Kevin Vickers. I mean, blocking a leader from taking a seat in the legislature is a pretty big deal. We're not too surprised that Chris Austin took back Fredericton Grand Lake. I mean, obviously, that's a pleasant surprise. There were times through the campaign when the polling wasn't exactly leaning that way. But one thing that we also heard through the campaign is Chris Austin constantly saying, like you said, he wasn't pitching to be the premier. He wasn't saying, put me in the premier's office. He was saying, keep me at the table. Obviously, didn't exactly go the way he was pushing for with this majority government for the PCs. So we'll see a little bit less power for the People's Alliance when he does return to Fredericton. But I mean, He is returning to Fredericton, and he's taking Michelle Conroy with him. Both of them are supposed to be here not too long from now, so we'll have to wait and see what they have to say. Sarah, I'll send it back to you until then.
Okay, thank you so much, Travis. That's Travis Fortnum at People's Alliance headquarters in Fredericton. Let's have a look now at where some of the progressive conservative cabinet ministers have held on to their ridings. Jake Stewart, re-elected in Southwest Miramichi-Baie-du-Vin. No surprise there. That's a pretty wide margin for him as well. In Moncton Southwest, Sherry Wilson returns to the legislature. In this riding, a pretty big lead for her as well, or a pretty big margin for her as well in this one. In St. John East, Glenn Savoy, I'm not really sure. Glenn will return to the legislature. He was the Minister of the Francophonie. Interesting storyline, which I will get to a little bit later on here with this one. And in Oromocto, Lincoln, Fredericton, Mary Wilson will return to the legislature for the Progressive Conservatives. So you're looking at cabinet ministers. You always expect cabinet ministers to do well on election night, especially if the government returns. In Moncton Northwest, Ernie Steeves back in the legislature as well. Narrower win for him here, just 387 votes. St. John Harbour, Arlene Dunn will go to the legislature. So this is a place where the PCs have actually gained a seat. The Liberals held this one just by 10 votes. They won it just by 10 votes in 2018. In St. Croix, this is considered a PC gain. It was a PC seat, but it was vacant as of dissolution. So this was Greg Thompson's old riding. Kathy Baucus now takes this one, and she will head to Fredericton as the MLA for this riding. In Fredericton, York, Ryan Cullens picks up this seat from the People's Alliance and Rick Desaulniers, who is dropped back to third place here. That's an interesting result for the People's Alliance. So as Travis was saying, a bit of a mixed bag for them at this point. I want to go back to David Akin. We are expecting Progressive Conservative leader Blaine Higgs and Premier Blaine Higgs to speak any minute now. While we wait, David, we had a look at the room earlier, and just give us a sense of how strange it is to look at a completely empty room on election night.
That was the room where a party has just won a majority government. I think we saw one guy sitting there having a lonely beer. That's it. And normally, of course, Sarah, I don't think I need to explain. At majority headquarters or the winner's headquarters, it's like thunder sticks and people are going nuts. But of course, this is an election in a pandemic. And speaking of which, I think New Brunswick has shown the country you can do an election in a pandemic. We haven't talked about voter turnout yet tonight, Sarah, but I'm just looking at the most recent numbers, and I think the voter turnout was a very healthy 60%. Now, that's down from 2018. 2018, it was 67%. That was a quote-unquote change election. I've always found in a change election, voter turnout does tend to be a little higher. But anyways, 60% in a time of pandemic is very healthy. So New Brunswickers ought to be that's great. I mean, voters showed up and participated in the process. I know there was one new COVID case today in New Brunswick, but by and large, the pandemic has been under control. And I really think, Sarah, too, as we think about the rest of the country, can an election happen? We tend to look at elections about, well, are people moving left? Are people moving right? People moving green? And I'm not so sure that was the ballot question or that's what powered Higgs to victory. I think in this pandemic election, it was a referendum on the government's handling of both the health crisis and any potential recovery. And to the extent that Higgs really said, I need the stability of a majority government, the certainty of 4 years of majority to put in place recovery plans and continue to manage the health crisis, I think New Brunswickers took a look at what he's done so far and kind of went, okay, you got it. And I think that is going to be a message that incumbent governments in the rest of the country keep an eye on. As you heard from Mercedes, we've got elections in Saskatchewan this fall, possibly in BC, where another minority premier is thinking about going to the polls. And here in Ottawa, we have a minority government as well, the Trudeau government. Trudeau says he doesn't want an election, but this may take a little starch out of the opposition, and they may not want to force an election. So I think in this case, New Brunswickers showed you can do an election in the pandemic, voter turnout very strong, and an incumbent essentially won a referendum on his ability to manage this pandemic.
Yeah, David, I would agree with you there. It definitely felt like a referendum election on Blaine Higgs' leadership through the COVID crisis, although, to be fair, he didn't really give people much more option than that, did he? He presented his platform last Friday.
Yeah, you talked to him, and when you try to interview him about this, it was a bit vague, other than it was, I need to have this stability of 4 more years. But again, if you buy that thesis, and we can argue about that it was a referendum on his stewardship through the COVID crisis, there will be political parties and political operatives in the rest of the country and federally that say that is the reasonable interpretation, and maybe so long as the incumbent has got good marks for managing the crisis, and that would be just about everybody except Alberta's Jason Kenney, then that's good news for incumbents.
Okay, David, we were waiting to hear from the Premier this evening. We're just hearing actually that Blaine Higgs has been delayed on his way into the room in Quispamsis, certainly not by the crowd, so we'll find out what's going on there. You are watching Decision New Brunswick. We're going to take another break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. It's been a good night for the Progressive Conservatives, who will form a majority government here in New Brunswick. A bad night for the Liberals, whose leader has failed to get elected so far. They are trailing only leading and elected in 17 seats at this moment. Let's have a look at how that's all shaken out. So this is so far a gain of 7 seats for the Progressive Conservatives, solidly into majority territory, the majority number being 25. The Liberals will lose 3 if these results hold. The Greens will stay status quo, and the People's Alliance support appears to have dropped back across New Brunswick. Let's have a look now at the popular vote. This tells a different story. So the Alliance support dropping back by about 3 points. The Green support is up. The Liberals are actually very close to where they were last go round, but it's the Progressive Conservatives really making a big gain here this evening, and in the seats and in the popular vote that they have. I want to send things back to Toronto and Tracy Tong, who is keeping an eye on some of these national storylines. And David Akin was just talking about this before the break. The federal Liberals will be keeping a close eye on what's happening here tonight. Tracy.
That's right, Sarah. We did hear from David just before the break that New Brunswick is really showing the rest of the country tonight that an election can be held during the pandemic. But we do have to understand and remember that the situation in New Brunswick is very different from the situation in some of the other provinces. I want to bring in Mercedes Stevenson now. We were just talking about, Mercedes, the COVID-19 numbers being very low in New Brunswick. As David had mentioned, there's 1 new case today. Not the case or the situation in areas like Ontario or Quebec, that where we're seeing numbers really quickly rising there. When we're talking about Elections Canada, looking into ways to vote safely, how to safely hold an election, what are they looking at right now, and how are they going to apply that across the country?
Well, they basically have to think about everything that we take for granted in a normal federal election. Even little things like typically when you go behind the blind to fill out your ballot, there's a pencil that has to stay back there. Well, you don't want everybody touching that pencil now. You're going to have to worry about sterilizing it, about ensuring that there's proper physical distancing, that you don't have lineups coming into the polls. If it's cold and there's people standing outside, all of these things are things that they have to think about, the kind of ventilation even inside. So there's lots of things they have to consider. We don't know precisely how this is all going to shake out because they themselves are still researching it. But one of the questions we've been putting to federal politicians here in Ottawa has been, would you be willing to wait until Elections Canada says that they have a roadmap, a blueprint for how to do an election safely, or would you go before this? So while New Brunswick shows that you can have an election and the electorate may not punish you, we'll have to wait and see what the transmission rates after this are. But that said, as you mentioned, Tracy, it's not really representative of, for example, downtown Toronto or British Columbia, or even right here in Ottawa, where we've seen the rates rising pretty substantially in recent days and weeks.
And you just mentioned they would have to come up with a roadmap of some sort and apply that on a more national scale. So could that look like, a set of rules for really the worst performing jurisdiction when it comes to COVID?
Well, that's the question. I mean, are they going to open up the Elections Canada Act? Are they going to come up with some kind of a bridging mechanism? Whatever it is, whatever format that takes, it would be to try to protect people who are out there voting. And they're looking into that very carefully right now, not only to make sure that there's certain rules that are in place for a reason to ensure things like confidentiality, that you still have that, but that you're also taking the science into consideration about how COVID can spread and what the best way is to make sure that you don't have people who are going out to vote spreading it from one person to another, or those scrutineers who are in the polls, the volunteers, the people who work for Elections Canada, who will be there exposed all the time. As you can imagine, things like masks are obvious, but this goes a lot further beyond this when you're talking about thousands of people going into polling stations.
And we did certainly see in New Brunswick huge turnout for advance polling, so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the coming months as well. Thank you, Mercedes, for that insight. For now, Sarah, we'll send it back to you.
Thanks so much, Tracy. And we're hearing that there may be a victory speech, or a speech, I guess, coming very shortly from People's Alliance leader Chris Austin. I don't know, are we headed there right now? Okay, here's Chris Austin speaking to supporters in Fredericton.
So despite not having that minority government we were hoping for and the gains that we were looking for, I'm still very confident that we have made some significant change in the political landscape, and there's only much more to come as we move forward. We still have our foot in the door, make no mistake about it. They say behind any good man, if they choose to call me that, I've been called all kinds of things, but they say behind every good man is a good woman. I want to thank my wife and my family for being there. There's no question when you're in politics how much it takes out of the family. I'm not alone in that. I know every party, every leader goes through the same type of thing. So I want to thank my wife and the kids. My family's here, my mom, my dad, grandmother, brother, sister. All of them are here to support me and what we've done. And I'm excited that we're going to continue to move forward and still have a voice for the people in the legislature. So again, thank you, team. You worked so hard. You should be proud of yourself. We are still in the legislature, and we're still there to bring that common sense aspect to politics. So I'm not sure if there's any questions from the media, but be happy to take them.
Sure. Where do you go forward from here?
Okay, you've been listening to People's Alliance leader Chris Austin. He's in Fredericton speaking to supporters this evening. The message from him pretty clear. This isn't a victory speech necessarily, but he's trying to reinforce with his supporters that they're still at the table, and that is what he asked voters for when this campaign started. But he does lose one seat, so it's just himself and Michelle Conroy heading back to the legislature. Really can't understate how big that win was for Michelle Conroy in Miramichi, though. I want to talk about a different scenario that's playing out here in this election. So the Progressive Conservatives will form a majority government. Let's have a look at some of the folks who have won for the PCs. So starting in Moncton East, Danielle Alain has won this seat, taken it away from the incumbent Liberals. This is important because Danielle Alain is a Francophone candidate, and these are things that we always need to talk about in New Brunswick politics. Who are the Francophone ministers who can join cabinet? Well, here are some of the other cabinet ministers heading back to the legislature. Jake Stewart in Southwest Miramichi Baie-du-Vin will be heading back to the legislature as well. In Moncton Southwest, Sherry Wilson returns to the legislature, another returning cabinet minister here. In St. John East is Glenn Savoy or Savoy. It depends on when you are saying this name. I want to bring in Laurie Turnbull now if we can. So Laurie, this is the province, the country's rather only bilingual province. Language is always an important factor in New Brunswick politics, and you've got to think for Blaine Higgs that he's got to be taking a look at the slate of candidates that he was able to offer and the slate of candidates who will be joining him in Fredericton, and wondering who can he appoint to cabinet who does speak French as a first language.
That's it. And that was one of the strikes against Higgs from day one, is that he's not strong in French. And so he had a hard time appealing, I think, to the north of the province. Like when it came to how is he going to be able to come up with enough seats to form a majority, I think that was kind of his problem. Like that was what he had to overcome. And during the campaign, we saw a number of his candidates who were running in the north of the province say, look, you know, he can't speak French, but we can. And so, you know, to Francophone New Brunswickers, if you want to be around the table, you have to elect somebody. You have to elect somebody from the Progressive Conservative Caucus. And so now that Higgs is in a position of a majority, I think, yeah, he's going to have enough people that he's going to be able to draw some representation from the Francophone part of the province and be able to kind of deliver a little bit more on that. And certainly, as many people have said, we don't ever want to see a scenario where a province, the country, is broken down in a party system according to linguistic lines. That doesn't work. And so I think now he's able to claim some legitimacy on that file, and he's able to go forward and hopefully build more of a kind of coalition across the province. And I mean, presumably, as we all rebuild during post-COVID, he's going to be doing some really difficult things. And a lot of this is yet to be seen. It depends on what he does with the federal government. But now I think he's hopefully a little bit more able to build that coalition inside the province.
Right, Laurie. And so if we can all remember a time before the pandemic, I struggle with this a little bit too, but if we can cast our minds back that far, Robert Gauvin, who was the PC Deputy Premier, he was their Francophone minister, the minister responsible for the Francophonie. And when he left caucus over these healthcare reforms that were proposed by the Higgs government, he left caucus and sat as an independent. And that's when Glenn Savoy or Savoy, I've been struggling a little bit with this one, but I believe it's Savoy at this point. Glenn Savoy became the minister responsible for the Francophonie. So you will be looking for him to return to cabinet. And Laurie, I was going to ask you a question here, but I'm actually just going to break in and we're going to head to Fredericton because David Coon is just getting ready to speak to his supporters in Fredericton this evening. He is not there yet, actually. Hang on a second. They're just getting ready. So, Laurie, we would look for Glenn Savoy in St. John East to head back to cabinet and be joined by probably Danielle Alain. But how important is it for Blaine Higgs then to make inroads with some of the folks up north who traditionally vote Liberal and who traditionally speak French?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important, and he knows that. And I think, I mean, even when you look at some of the results coming in tonight and you look at how large the victory is for Progressive Conservative, like those who are elected for the PC party, some of those margins are well over the 50%, right? And so you see kind of how the voter, like how the popular vote breaks down, and that there are a lot of votes that are cast for Progressive Conservative candidates and ridings where it's like, okay, they've got quite a bit of the popular vote, but it's almost like they didn't need all those votes in some of those ridings. And so it kind of, it gives a sense that they've got quite a bit of support across the province, when in fact their vote is quite concentrated in certain ridings, as the Liberals is. And so I think going forward, you know, Higgs is going to really try to expand his claim to represent the whole province. And again, I think it's going to be really important for him when he's trying to bring forward measures to rebuild the economy post-COVID and to try to manage that, because like the kind of popular support he enjoyed during the pandemic, that's not going to last forever. There's going to be a lot more scrutiny on Premier Higgs, and now that he's going to be a majority government premier, in a way he's got that accountability now. He is the only person that's going to be responsible in some ways for what comes forward, and so I think it's all the more important for him to be able to build inroads across the province, to be able to represent everybody with authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely, Lori. We're still waiting for David Coon to come up and give his speech to supporters in Fredericton this evening. But you heard him earlier in the broadcast talking about how he feels. Actually, let's go to David Coon right now. He is speaking.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Good evening, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bonsoir tout le monde. I want to start off by acknowledging, of course, that we are gathered here today or tonight on the traditional territories, unceded territories of the Wastegui people. And I will say tonight, we will continue to fight for an inquiry into the systemic racism in our justice and police systems on behalf of the Indigenous people from all over this province. Before I start, I also want to say, to acknowledge the pain and loss of the families whose loved ones died in the tragic accidents in Hanwell, Blackville, and Belle Isle Bay over the past couple of days. Our thoughts and prayers are with you all. This election certainly was one for the history books. A pandemic, a public health emergency, and here we were in an election campaign. We were challenged to campaign in new and creative ways, and our candidates across this province stood up and did exactly that, effectively campaigning safely, keeping everyone safe and healthy and secure, but campaign in very creative ways. Cette élection est certainement une pour les livres d'histoire. Nous avons été mis au défi de faire campagne avec de nouveaux moyens créatifs pour que chacun se sente en toute sécurité pendant la campagne en pleine pandémie. I want to say congratulations to Blaine Higgs for securing for forming government, and I will be looking to sit down with him at the earliest opportunity to discuss our ideas for addressing pressing priorities in this province. And I look forward to continuing to contribute to the work of the COVID-19 Cabinet Committee to help keep all New Brunswickers safe, secure, and healthy. I want to say thank you to the people of Fredericton South for your confidence in me to continue working hard for you, and I can't wait to get back to doing the job you've elected me to do, to continue to work hard on your behalf for all of the issues that are so important in this city, solving the homelessness problem, addressing health care, and ensuring we get both the Performing Arts Centre a capital city like ours deserves, and an aquatic centre that a capital city like ours should have. Thank you and grand merci to all of the committed, hard-working members of the campaign teams and volunteers of both my local campaign and the provincial team. Volunteers and the campaign team members, you have been incredible. You've worked so hard. And I can't thank you enough for all the work you've done, for your commitment, for the endless hours you've devoted, the time you've taken away from your families and your loved ones. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Merci beaucoup. To those of you who have voted Green for the very first time, maybe it was your very first vote ever, as a young person or as a new citizen, thank you for becoming part of our movement of hope for a fairer and more sustainable New Brunswick. Aux Acadiennes et Acadiens qui ont pris le bon risque de voter vert pour la première fois, je ne vous laisserai pas tomber. Sans l'Acadie, le Nouveau-Brunswick n'est pas le Nouveau-Brunswick. Je vous promets que vous avez en moi un allié pour protéger vos droits linguistiques. We are a diverse province, and Greens will fight hard to create a culture of respect in this government and throughout society. Everyone should have a seat at the table. There must be nobody who feels excluded as we map the path to our future recovery. And that has to be a recovery that we can be proud of to leave for our children. You have elected Green MLAs because of their fresh new ideas, their energy, and their commitment to community. You have voted in large numbers in the north, in the south, in the east, in the west, for Greens spread across this province. And this is a clear message to Mr. Higgs that we have support around this province. We have unity around this province for the Greens in this province, and we will fight to end division in this province and ensure that no one is turned against the other, that South and North come together, that no one is disadvantaged, that rural and urban come together, that no one is disadvantaged. Vous avez élu des députés verts pour les raisons suivantes, leur nouvelle idée, leur énergie et leur engagement envers la communauté. We will work hard to unleash the power of community to tackle the challenges we face. I know in your communities what you are capable of achieving in each community of this province, in every region, if the provincial government would just embrace your ideas to address your needs and your expectations rather than telling you what you need and what you should expect. And we will work tirelessly, relentlessly to ensure that's what happens in New Brunswick. The well-being of you and your families will always be at the heart of every decision our Green Caucus takes as we navigate through the pandemic and chart our path to recovery without undermining the environment upon which we utterly depend. And that recovery has got to lift everyone up, and we will stand up for everyone to ensure that's the case. There must be no gaps for anyone to fall through. Our recovery has got to launch us on the path to keep everyone safe and secure from the other global crisis, the environmental crisis, the climate emergency, and we will do that. If all MLAs in the House and all cabinet members would just always put the future of our children first, like we do in our own families, then we can't go wrong, whether we're tackling environmental problems, economic challenges, or social challenges that are before us. We have work to do. My colleagues and I can't wait to get at it. Nous avons du pain sur la planche. Allons de l'avant ensemble. Willie Wan, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, you have been listening there to Green Party leader David Coon speaking to supporters this evening in Fredericton. He will return to the legislature as a third-time MLA. And heading there with him is Megan Mitten in Memramcook Tantramar. As you can see on your screen right now, Kent North, still a race that we have not called. Kevin Arsenault is leading in this one, but our decision desk tells me that even though there are only 2 polls left to report, with the tabulation machines, there can be a lot of votes in those tabulation machines. And so we're waiting to call that one to see whether Kevin Arsenault will return to the legislature with his leader. And if he did, that would be 3 seats, a hold of all 3 seats for the Greens. On a night where the PCs are gaining the most, 7 seats over dissolution, the Liberals losing quite badly, including their leader losing his seat. Kevin Vickers does not return to the legislature. Michelle Conroy for the People's Alliance does. And as David Coon was saying, the support for the Greens is up this time around. 15% of voters chose a Green Party candidate this evening. That didn't translate into more seats for them, but it is more support for them. And he's already kind of given a warning to Premier Blaine Higgs that he's going to have to pay attention to those Green voters and to those Green MLAs, even in this majority legislature. All right, we're going to take another break here. You're watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020, a big night for the progressive Conservatives in New Brunswick. They will form a majority government. You're having a look there live at the PC party headquarters in Quispamsis. We're told that Blaine Higgs will arrive very shortly. We will be keeping a very close eye on that door. I don't know whose arm that is in the door, but David Aiken is standing by to chat with us as we wait here. David, one of the things that's kind of unusual about this situation, other than, of course, this empty room, is the fact that we have not yet heard from Kevin Vickers tonight.
Yeah, that is. And of course, the normal routine for any election I've covered is you sort of hear from the losing leaders first, and then you hear from the winner. Winner gets the last word. And so we have heard from Chris Austin. That would make sense as the fourth place finisher, if you will. Then we heard from David Coon, the third place finisher. You'd expect Kevin Vickers to say something. There seems to be, I wouldn't say confusion right now, but just seems to be wondering, is Vickers going to stay in Miramichi? Was he going to drive down to Fredericton to speak to people? In any event, there is the arm, and I'm looking at the shot too. That door is opening, and here comes the crowds of people to welcome Blaine Higgs. And of course, Sarah, this is the pandemic election. So normally when a leader enters a room, you've seen this before. I know when we did the last New Brunswick election, Nova Scotia elections, the leader would come into a room filled with people beating thundersticks and chanting, Higgs, Higgs, Higgs. And it's going to be a very quick walk to the podium. It's not going to be high-fiving too many people. Yeah, David, we're told that Blaine Higgs is just putting on a mask because, of course, again, this is a pandemic election. He's just putting on his mask and getting ready to come into this room. And you're right, it doesn't seem like it'll be that long, drawn-out process of getting him up to the stage. Feels like a pretty short walk there. So we should hear from him relatively quickly here this evening. And I think one of the things, Sarah, I was going to say, one of the things, I think David Coon, I don't know if the Premier was listening to David Coon speak, but what some of the things Coon talked about was uniting North and South, bringing people together. Just to go back to tonight's electoral map again, we're pushing blue up. So there is some significant blue, right now as high as Carleton, Victoria, if we want to go up the valley that way. But also I think of Daniel Alain in the Moncton East riding. Daniel, I'm certain, is going to be going into cabinet. There you have a native French speaker. But there are some things for Higgs to address here. Again, it's the French-English thing, the urban-rural thing, and, well, okay, the New Brunswickers have said, so far so good on your government managing this COVID-19 crisis. What's the next step? What are you going to do with 4 more years? And I hope that the Premier gives some indication of that tonight. That would be probably a good strategy for a winner. And we saw that when Jason Kenney won his majority in Alberta. That was the sort of speech he said, let's bring people together. We saw that with Doug Ford in Ontario, Francois Legault in Quebec. I assume Blaine Higgs has got the hint, and he'll be doing the same thing.
Yeah, I expect to hear him talk about that all-party cabinet committee too, David, because that was something that New Brunswick did very early on into this pandemic. Blaine Higgs called together the leaders of the other parties. They had this committee that was discussing all kinds of issues, from whether the legislature would meet to what the recovery would look like, what back to school would look like. So all of these things were discussed at that table. And Blaine Higgs has said that he would like to continue that. I know the other leaders would too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Higgs obviously, and quite rightly, should be thinking about the immediate crisis, the economic crisis we have, the public health crisis, which still has to be managed. But I think from a political standpoint as well, he wants to think about, okay, how do we extend his party's appeal into other areas of the province? And I'm just trying to think, we haven't had back-to-back victories by a premier probably since Bernard Lord. Sean Graham beat Lord, then Graham got beaten by Allward, then Allward got beaten by Gallant, and Higgs beat Gallant. I think I got that right, if I go back in my New Brunswick history. So we haven't had back-to-back. So here's the first back-to-back. We haven't had a lot of back-to-back-to-back in sort of modern New Brunswick history. So again, Higgs may want to think about that too. Get through this crisis and then think about establishing his party perhaps as the go-to default for electors in the riding. And he's not got the mask on, Sarah. He's got the shield. He's going with the shield tonight.
Yeah. He and his family there walking into the room, and they're coming to the back here, David. You can see they're greeting some of these supporters at the back. We're expecting him to head up to that podium. It does look so different. I remember 2018. It was gosh, it felt like 5 minutes of Blaine Higgs moving from the door to the podium, and it wasn't that far for him to walk.
And of course, in 2018, he was litigating the election because, you know, Brian Gallant did not concede. We didn't know what was going to happen, but this time around, Higgs is going to be, I think, in a lot better mood.
Yeah, you've got to think that he's in a lot better mood, and he's feeling a lot more confident about his party's direction for the province heading into the next 4 years. Although, you know, we say that, but can any leader really be feeling all that confident about where they're going at this point? This pandemic has really turned everything upside down.
Well, let's just hope we're long way into getting everybody vaccinated by the time New Brunswickers have to go to the polls again. That Higgs has got his 4 years, and they're going to see elections elsewhere in this country. But Higgs has 4 years where New Brunswick can say at the provincial level, there's some certainty and stability politically. And I know, you know, not everybody voted for the PCs. He didn't, you know, it's a minority popular vote. He only got, what are we at, 37% or something like that? So he does have a whole lot of New Brunswickers that he needs to speak to tonight that did not vote PC.
Yeah, absolutely. And we heard David Coon reference that as well. Laurie Turnbull is standing by with us. And Laurie, I know that you were listening to David Coon's speech as well. He talked about how Blaine Higgs is going to need to acknowledge that 10% of the electors who chose the Greens tonight, I believe it was 10, might be even higher than that. Hang on, let me get that number. But Laurie, regardless, we talked about how he's going to need to build some bridges here, even though he's a majority leader. What do you think he'll need to say to New Brunswickers tonight?
I mean, I think the issues that came up during the campaign, and again, it was a short campaign. It was largely about whether we want Higgs to have a majority or a minority. But I think what he can take from this is that there's a lot of concern in the province about how economic rebuilding is going to go forward in a green way. And so regardless of how the votes stack up and whether the Green Party is able to maintain a larger presence in the legislature, and it looks like they won't, at the same time, you know, there's a significant chunk of the province that is quite concerned about climate change issues. And so, you know, even, and many who didn't vote Green. And so I think he can't discount that. He has to think going forward, you know, any majority government premier or prime minister does, how your job is to represent the whole province, not just those who voted for you. And so I think he is going to have to think about how to build inroads and how to build recovery going forward in a way that is balanced and sustainable. And I mean, I think, you know, that's been a big part of the leaders' debates and the conversations that have been happening in the last few weeks in the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Laurie. Let's go now to Quispamsis, where Blaine Higgs is addressing his supporters.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nothing like coming to a packed hall. This is life in COVID. Yeah, great night. And look, I just thanks everyone so much because I know everyone has worked hard. It certainly was I think a testament to our province and our capabilities and working within COVID. Once again, I think we're on the national scene and looking at how we can keep moving forward and progressing as a province. And I'm really excited about that. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. It's been an exciting evening. At least it won't take 5 weeks to know who's going to be in government. You know, we lost some valuable time last time. Mes chers amis, chers gens de Nouveau-Brunswick, fellow New Brunswickers, tonight the road is clear. Nous voyons plus clair maintenant. Tonight we find ourselves with more certainty than ever before. It's a certainty that comes from knowing New Brunswickers want us to seize the momentum that we have right now and keep building. It's a certainty that comes from knowing New Brunswickers want us to keep aiming higher, to keep this province moving forward, safely, with focus, with stability, and with results. And I'm excited about tonight's results. Ce soir, nous renouvelons nos engagements de servir les gens de la province et de réaliser le programme de notre gouvernement. Les New Brunswickois et les New Brunswickoises ont voté pour une équipe qui est prête à diriger. Une équipe de direction éprouvée. Une équipe qui prendra des décisions difficiles de façon équitable pour faire avancer notre province. Tonight we have a newfound commitment to each other and to our government's plan. New Brunswickers have voted for leadership that is prepared, for leadership that has been tested and will continue to be tested, and for leadership that will make tough and balanced decisions to keep our province moving forward. Come what may in the months and the years ahead, we know we'll have stability and experience leading us through these challenging times. I want to thank every New Brunswicker who showed the country how democratic elections can be held safely during this pandemic. In this election, you, the people of New Brunswick, showed everyone that we are stronger together. You reminded us that we always rise to the occasion. You came out in historic numbers to vote in the advanced polls. You followed the rules. You kept each other safe. Thank you for that. Je tiens à remercier tous les New Brunswickois et New Brunswickoises qui ont démontré qu'il nous parvient tenir des élections sûres et démocratiques pendant cette pandémie. Durant ces élections, les gens de Nouveau-Brunswick nous ont montré que nous sommes plus forts ensemble. Nous avons voté par anticipation en des nombres historiques cette fois. Nous avons respecté les règlements. Nous avons fait attention à la sécurité des autres. Je vous en remercie. It's just another example of how the people of New Brunswick are ready to lead. I also want to thank the people of my riding of Quispamsis. You first elected me in 2010, and I have been honored to be your voice in Fredericton over the last decade. And I want to particularly comment about my dedicated team of volunteers in this and in every election. Many of you have been there from the very beginning and continue to be supporting. It's a humbling experience and one that I'm deeply, deeply appreciated for your great efforts. And one of the things that I've said in the last election, you know, the vote count was higher when I wasn't here. And then this election, it was higher and we never knocked on a door. So I think elections are changing in Canada now and in our province. Public service is a privilege like none other. And I'm humbled to serve you again for 4 more years as MLA and as Premier. Avant de me joindre à vous ce soir, j'ai parlé avec Kevin Vickers et je la remercie pour son engagement à servir de la public. Before joining you tonight, I spoke to Kevin Vickers, and I thanked him for his commitment to public service, his service to Canada, and I told him how grateful I was that he participated. And I know it's been a tough night. While we may have differences, we have many things in common, and at the top of the list is that we care about New Brunswick. I look forward to continue to work with all parties on the Cabinet COVID Committee. Je tiens également à exprimer ma gratitude à Chris Austin, à Mackenzie Thomason et à David Coon, ainsi que tous les autres candidats et les candidates qui sont présentés, qu'ils s'en soient leur parti. C'est votre désir de servir notre province qui nous assure une démocratie vigoureuse, et nous en sommes extrêmement reconnaissants. I also want to express my gratitude to Chris Austin and David Coon and Mackenzie Thompson, and to all of the candidates across the province, no matter what party they ran for. Your desire to serve our province is what makes us strong, makes a strong democracy, and we are all better for it. To my campaign team and all of our candidates who ran for the Progressive Conservative in this election, and I believe we've elected 9 women as MLAs, and that is the highest in the PC history in this province. So that's great news. We had the most diverse slate of candidates in the history of our party in this province, and we are much, much stronger for it. And of course, I want to thank my family, whose support really knows no bounds. For Marcia and I, this time spent serving our province is about building a better tomorrow. That's why we made our home here and raised our daughters here. We want future generations to have that same opportunity. I am confident that day will come. We are well on our way. We've seen so much success already before COVID and in our response to COVID. We've seen innovation. We've seen perseverance. We've seen compassion. Right across this province, we've seen the best of people. And I know this is only the beginning. I have witnessed firsthand, especially through the COVID experience, the innovation, capability, and pride of service that every employee of the province of New Brunswick has. And I can just imagine what more we can achieve, because together we will look for those innovative ideas to move us forward. Nous avons vu de l'innovation, de la persévérance, de la compassion. Dans toutes les provinces, nous avons vu les gens donner le meilleur d'eux-mêmes, et ce n'est que le début. This is a critical turning point for our province. There is much work to do, and I commit that I will continue to put province before politics. I will continue to be inclusive and collaborative. North, south, urban, rural. Our government will continue to be focused on helping all regions succeed. Je continuerai d'être inclusif et collaboratif, que ce soit le nord, le sud, les régions urbaines ou rurales. L'objectif primordial de notre gouvernement sera d'aider toutes les régions et ses espanoirs. Aucune région ne sera laissée pour compte. We will make sure no New Brunswicker is left behind. Together we will recover. Together we will realize our potential. And together we will rise to new heights. I am sure the best is yet to come, and we are up to the job to deliver. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
All right, you have been listening there to the victory speech of Premier Blaine Higgs as he returns to the legislature with a strengthened caucus of 27 progressive conservative MLAs. We heard him in that speech talking about things like certainty and stability, as well as inclusivity and collaboration. So those are the themes we'll be watching for as we move on in this election night and as we move into the next several weeks and months as well. I want to have a look at how many people voted overall, because you did hear Blaine Higgs reference that as well. So here's how it stacks up from 2018 to this year. You can see the PCs had more people vote for them. It appears taking a lot of those votes from the Liberals. The Greens had more people voting for them as well. The People's Alliance, fewer people voting for them this go round, and that does bear out in the seats. As we look at these numbers, it's interesting to know that Blaine Higgs was saying to New Brunswickers, we've just proven to the country that elections can be held safely in COVID-19. It remains to be seen if any other premiers feel the same way and if they decide to go to an election themselves. We'll be watching that in British Columbia. We'll be watching whether the Prime Minister feels that way as well. Certainly a different room there in Quispamsis for Blaine Higgs, and it's been a different campaign and a different election. We have more still to come after the break. You're watching Decision New Brunswick. Stay with us.
Bonsoir, madame.
Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. We're having a look there at Miramichi, where Liberal Leader Kevin Vickers is standing by, ready to speak. He did not make the drive to Fredericton to join his supporters as he had planned. Let's listen to Kevin Vickers.
Bien sûr, j'ai fait mon mieux et je pense que l'équipe de notre caucus, nous avons travaillé fort, mais c'est évident que les gens de Nouveau-Brunswick
Okay, so Kevin Vickers there in Miramichi this evening. He is speaking to, I'm thinking he's answering questions here, but I'm not 100% sure who he's answering questions to. So we will get that information for you if we can. But a bad night for him, obviously. The Liberals not forming government. He did not win his seat in Miramichi, which is a crushing defeat for him. Hard to imagine how he can continue as leader without a seat in the legislature. He appears to be answering questions in French at this moment, so we will wait for him to, I think he's going to give a speech of some kind to his Liberal supporters and his team at some point. But as I mentioned a couple of moments ago, he actually was planning, let's bring in David Aiken to talk about this. Kevin Vickers was planning to drive to Fredericton tonight. That's where Shelley Steeves is standing by at Liberal Party headquarters. We expected him to make the trip and then speak to supporters there, David, and it kind of says it all that he didn't even get in the car this evening.
No, and, you know, this politics, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. You know, I feel personally bad for Kevin Vickers. Here in Ottawa, we, of course, know him. He was the sergeant at arms when terrorists attacked Parliament Hill, and he played a significant role in apprehending and, as it turns out, in having to kill that terrorist. So, in personal level, we know him, feel bad for him. But this is politics, and voters in New Brunswick were very clear with their message tonight that they want Blaine Higgs to continue. We've been talking about the popular vote, Sarah, for the Liberals and how it was a little bit off last time around. But I just want to use the map behind me to just run through how even that overall popular vote for the Liberals distorts things. And it gives you a sense of the challenge now for Vickers if he stays on. I just don't see how he's going to stay on, but it gives you a sense of the challenge the Liberals have. Let's take a look in the northern part of the province. That is where, the Liberal red, of course, that is where the Liberals have their seats. And in those seats, they just ran up the score. Let's take a look, for example, Restigouche Chaleur, Daniel Guittard wins. Look at the vote percentage there. Over 55% for the Liberals. Next in second place, nearly 30 points back. There's a run up the score. Let's check in Campbellton, Dalhousie. Look at that. Guy Arsenault, 65% of the vote to 20%. You're beating somebody by 45 points. And that is typical if we go all over the region, up in the north, where the Liberals win, they just run up the score. That's an inefficient vote. Even though they got, 1 in 3 voters in New Brunswick, or better than that, voted Liberal, it's all the voters kind of living up there. They need to be much more competitive in the central part of the province, more coming down the St. John River Valley there. And certainly if we look at Moncton tonight as well, some alarm bells in Moncton. They lost Moncton East. Daniel Alain is the winner there, and Monique LeBlanc was the incumbent, and she only managed to score 35% of the vote there. Moncton Centre should be an automatic for the Liberals, and they did indeed win, but it was a tough race, and the opponents sort of split the vote. Carol Chan, the Green, was doing very well there. So just to point out that as we look at that electoral map, yes, the Liberals got 1 in 3 votes in this election, but it's so heavily concentrated, that's going to be a real challenge for the next leader. That next leader really has to somehow find a way to speak to the English-speaking part of the province. Just as Blaine Higgs, as he acknowledged in his speech, he's got to now speak to those whose first language is French, those French speakers who are worried about bilingual services in all of New Brunswick, not just in their neighborhoods. So there's some challenges going both ways for both parties to reach to the other divide.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And while we have you, I'm wondering if you can pull up the results for Carleton Victoria, because this is our only riding that we have yet to call this evening. And our decision desk tells me that we are waiting on a tabulator to be brought to a returning office to count the last bit of votes here. So 28 of 30 polls reporting in this one, and it's still pretty close.
Yeah, and so this was the incumbent where Andrew Harvey was running, and this is a riding federally that's gone back and forth between Liberals and Conservatives. Right now it's held by the Conservatives, but the previous federal holder was a guy named TJ Harvey, a relative of Andrew Harvey, who right now is in second place to the PC or Margaret Johnson. Johnson has 45% of the votes counted, and Harvey has 40%. That is, I'd be relatively comfortable if I was Margaret Johnson, but what can happen with these tabulating machines is sometimes you could get the advance ballots, could be the last ones to come in. The advance vote was 50% higher than it was in 2018. So a lot more people recognizing that it's a pandemic and I want to make sure my vote gets cast. I want to do it safely. A lot more people went out and voted ahead of time. So in each riding, there's going to be a big, huge box with all the advance ballots, and there could be a lot of votes in that one box, that one poll of advance ballots. So once those get fed through the counting machine, if that's in fact what's happening, then we'll be able to decide here. But that is, and that's not going to affect, obviously, whether it's a majority or a minority. Even if for some reason Harvey comes back and takes it for the Libs, it's still going to be a PC majority. But there's your overall big map of the province. Lot of blue, and red up there in the north. And where it's red, it's really red.
Yeah, absolutely, David, and thanks for all your analysis on this. Before I let you go, I want to get your analysis on what you thought of Blaine Higgs' speech there. He started out with certainty and stability and momentum. Those were the words he was using at the beginning, and then by the end he was talking about collaboration and giving that sort of gracious thank you to the other leaders there. What's going to be the go-forward message for him?
Yeah, I think that was a smart speech. He obviously didn't commit himself to any real specific courses of action other than he was reaching out to other political players in the province. And I think that's a clear recognition that still 60% of the voters did not vote for his party tonight. They voted for somebody else. And he recognized the other leaders and said thank you to Kevin Vickers. I mean, just on Kevin Vickers, I do find it peculiar that Vickers has not decided to give a speech, if only because Vickers is the leader of a party that did get 3 in 10 votes. Those people who worked for the Liberals, who put their names on a ballot as a Liberal, who gave money to the Liberal Party, would like to hear how the party is going to move forward from this point. And if Vickers is not ready to be part of that moving forward, then perhaps he's ready to say so. And that may be a conversation he's having with his family and his advisors, and he hasn't really made a decision, but maybe he should say that. I'm going to say something about my future tomorrow morning or whatever it might be. But I do think if I was a Liberal worker, a Liberal candidate, I would like to hear from my leader about where we're going to go at this point in time.
Thanks, David. That's a really interesting point. I want to go now to Fredericton, where Ross Lord and Don Wright are standing by to get your analysis of what's going on with Kevin Vickers here. He's not giving a speech. He didn't make the drive to Fredericton. This doesn't look good, obviously, for him. It was a bad night.
Yeah, I guess you could look at that and make the argument that it's an extension of his political inexperience. He didn't have a lot of time to get up to speed and to learn how to do the job of party leader well or properly. This humiliating defeat happens where he doesn't even take his own riding, even though 17 of his fellow MLAs looks like are being elected. But Don, not surprising about what happened with Kevin Vickers tonight. What are the qualities that he maybe didn't have that Blaine Higgs does that resulted in this disastrous night for him?
Bottom line, experience. Look, he had a very distinguished career as a police officer, as an RCMP officer, served across the country. He did some very difficult policing during the crisis at Burnt Church a few years ago, overfishing lobster. By all accounts, he's a good and decent man, something of a Moses Cody figure, the social action Catholic. But he didn't have experience in politics, and politics is a vicious game. It's a blood sport. It chews you up and spits you out. And that's what happens to decent men. It can't be easy for him tonight.
I want to talk also about now that Higgs has a majority, it's easy to look at it and say, okay, New Brunswickers gave him the keys to the car and off he goes. But this majority, if there is such a thing, has some holes in it, right?
Well, first of all, it's 27, possibly 26 if Carleton Victoria goes back to the Liberals. That's not a commanding majority. And look, Blaine Higgs will have to work his backbenchers, keep them happy. There'll be a lot of cranky backbenchers who don't get into cabinet, who might make his life difficult, especially if he moves forward to start closing hospitals. He promised he won't, but who knows what will happen, especially if he goes forward to start closing hospitals. That could cost him his majority if they start breaking and sitting as independents. Likewise, that number 27, it's so artificial. You get a majority government with less than 4 in 10 New Brunswickers voting for you. 6 in 10 of New Brunswickers didn't vote for you. And that's the absurdity of the first-past-the-post system. And anybody who runs on a proportional representation campaign, they've got my vote.
Okay. So there is Don's, what is it when you do it every 2 years? Biannual?
Biennial?
Plea for proportional representation. But it's a good point, and we keep seeing it in elections, federally and provincially, or we do over the decades where majority governments earn less than 40%, like fewer than 4 in 10 voters actually support.
And Justin Trudeau promised he was going to give us proportional representation, and of course broke that promise. We've had commission after commission talking about it. Something has to give. And if you talk, that's why I like minority governments, because it forces the different parties to work together, and it means that your vote actually starts to count when your person is at the table.
Okay, so bottom line, he has a majority, so should small town hospitals be quaking, people in those communities be quaking in their boots now? Because he wanted to make that shake up, which would have closed some small town ERs overnight at least.
That's right.
And had to back off. Typically that's influenced by a vulnerable minority government. Now he has full control now. So should they be nervous?
Well, he has promised he won't do it, but what's a promise in politics? Nothing.
There you go. So we will see. There will be a lot of interesting storylines emerging, Sarah, now that Blaine Higgs has full control.
Okay, thank you so much, Ross. That's Ross Lord and Don Wright in Fredericton this evening. You're watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. We're going to take another break. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. A little earlier this evening, our Travis Fortnum was in Fredericton at People's Alliance headquarters where he spoke with leader Chris Austin. I want to give you a listen to that.
I'm here with People's Alliance leader Chris Austin. And Chris, I want to talk, obviously it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? This is not the outcome you wanted, having pushed for a minority government, keeping a seat at the table, but there's some pretty big wins for you guys tonight. Go ahead.
It's definitely a bittersweet moment. Very proud of Michelle. Michelle came in as a rookie MLA, and to take down the Liberal leader is truly a big feat. I give kudos to Mr. Vickers. He ran a good campaign. But Michelle's just a hard-working MLA. She's a local girl. She's down to earth, and she fought a good fight, and she won. So very proud of her. We're sad to see that Rick Desaulniers did not regain his seat. He as well has been a very hard-working MLA, but I think he, like a lot of others, just got caught up in the pandemic, and the New Brunswickers wanted that government to be able to work in the midst of the pandemic. We've seen good results. So again, I respect the wishes of New Brunswickers, and we'll keep moving forward.
Wondering if we could talk a little bit more about how this campaign was unusual, really. You stressed through much of it that New Brunswickers shouldn't be heading to the polls right now. Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, I guess it was a gamble that Mr. Blaine Higgs took, and it paid off for him. I understand that. But at the end of the day, this was an unconventional campaign like I've never saw. This is the fourth provincial election I've run in. I've also run in municipal elections. And I can tell you that this was the strangest one I've ever run in. And we're a grassroots party, so we're all about getting to the doors, talking to people on the ground, but you couldn't do a lot of that this campaign, and it did hurt us. There's no question. We relied on social media and TV ads and radio ads, but if you can't look somebody in the eye at the door and try to get the message to them, the message can get muddied throughout the campaign. So, it is what it is.
Exactly. And so what happens from here now? Like we said, that you hoped for this minority government to keep you guys at the table, give you a little bit of a louder voice in the ledge. So what happens from here?
Well, look, over the last couple of years, we've developed good relationships. I've developed good relationship with the Premier, Mr. Higgs. We've also had good networking with many of the cabinet ministers. So I'm hopeful that can continue. To be able to see that some of our ideas can still move through government. And that we still have that element of holding government to account as well. So, again, I was hoping for a minority situation. It didn't pan out that way, but I respect the wishes of New Brunswick. They made the decision, and that's how democracy works, and we'll certainly respect that and work with it.
Perfect. And like we said, you and Michelle will be back in the ledge, right? So
yes.
It's not all bad. So a bit of a mixed bag here. So, Sarah, I'll throw it back to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Travis. That was Travis Fortnum and People's Alliance leader Chris Austin in Fredericton a little bit earlier. Laurie Turnbull, I want to talk to you about something that Premier Higgs pointed out in his victory speech this evening. He mentioned that 9 of the 27 MLAs he's elected this evening are women. Overall, the Greens elected 1, the People's Alliance elected 1, the Liberals had 3 women elected this evening. That would be 14. That is a record for the New Brunswick legislature. 14 out of 49. MLAs are women this go round. What I wanted to talk to you about, though, there were 17 ministers in Blaine Higgs' cabinet at dissolution, so he actually has the opportunity here to achieve gender parity in his cabinet if he wants to, doesn't he?
He does. And, 5 years ago, the Prime Minister set that example in Canada for having a gender equal cabinet at the federal level. I'm not sure if that's the way that Blaine Higgs is going to play this, but obviously, regardless if he makes it, a perfectly gender equal cabinet or not, I think there's a lot of pressure on him to be inclusive as he can. And so it might be a really good opportunity for him, to start his kind of a new face to his government by being inclusive there and by showing that and I think that a few times during the campaign he's pointed out that the party was kind of taking a lead in being really inclusive in terms of their candidate roster. And it's hard. I think for us to become more inclusive in legislatures, it means that the parties really have to take the lead on that. Because obviously the parties are the ones that really, control, and I don't mean that in a bad way all the time, but they do have a lot to do with who ends up populating the legislature. And if the parties don't take a lead on being more inclusive, it's really hard for the legislature to get there. And so now that, if we're making progress, I think the next step to that is to make sure that not only is there more inclusion in the legislature, but in the executive branch as well.
And Laurie, it's interesting that you mentioned the parties having that kind of sway and the party leaders also having some sway. I know David Coon has talked about his being the most diverse slate of candidates heading into tonight. Mackenzie Thomason made a point of it with the NDP, although they didn't get anywhere close to a seat this evening. But for the Liberals, this is a drop back for them in the number of women that they offered this election. Out of 49 ridings, only 10 of their candidates were women. And I know Kevin Vickers said, well, we had this compressed time frame in order to nominate candidates. I wonder what you make of that explanation.
You know, like on some level, of course, there was this was a short campaign. There was some doubt as to whether or not Premier Higgs was going to go ahead with this call. But at the same time, I think part of being a political party is to always have a sense of election readiness. And parties know, you know, and people who study this stuff know that it's not always easy to get a woman to run for political office. And the statistic that I've heard that is backed by evidence is, you know, to get a woman to run for political office, on average, you have to ask her 14 times. And the political parties know that. And so this isn't something, it doesn't matter how long the campaign is, honestly. This is something that has to be an ongoing effort, and it's something that the parties have to take seriously every day, every year. And if not, we're not going to make any progress on it, to be honest.
Thanks, as always, for your analysis here, Laurie Turnbull. Want to go to David Akin now. We are expecting that Liberal leader Kevin Vickers will speak any minute now. So, David, we talked a little bit about, well, a lot, I guess, about Kevin Vickers' failure to win his own seat. Laurie and I were just talking about his failure to nominate a diverse slate of candidates. Do you think that has an impact, perhaps, on his fortunes this evening, or was this really just Blaine Higgs' race to win?
I really do think it was a referendum at the end of the day on the ability of the Higgs government to manage the pandemic. And so in that sense, I think the objectives for Vickers and the Liberals, had they been thinking perhaps a little more strategically, was to say, we need to get our leader a seat. And I think it was a strategic mistake to let him run, or I don't know who made it, maybe he did, to let him run in Miramichi. I think he should have run in Brian Gallant's old riding, Shediac Bay Dieppe, where, ironically, the former deputy leader of the PC party, Roger Gauvin, ran and won tonight. So that's an odd one. In any event, yeah, some strategic mistakes were made. You know, in every election, parties have certain, you know, what are we doing in this election? Why are we going to do it? What do we want to achieve? Strangely enough, Chris Austin spelled it out. We just want a minority government. Please send us, 3 or 4 members. Of course, voters can't. There's no minority government box on the ballot. But at least he was clear. He had an idea what was the objective for his party. I'm not sure that Vickers was so clear about it. And Vickers has already indicated to others that he's not going to be around to decide the future of his party. He's going to leave it to somebody else. He's going to, when we hear from him in a minute, he is going to step down or announce that or repeat what he's already told others, that he's going to step down. But again, strategy just didn't seem to be part of, a big part of Kevin Vickers' toolbox. Blame that on inexperience, but this is the Liberal Party of New Brunswick, which has been around a little while, and you'd think that there might be people that could have been drawn on to provide some help. And one of those, I've got to think, is Dominic LeBlanc, who is the consigliere for Liberals federally in New Brunswick. I don't really believe Dominic played a big part in this election. He's had health troubles. So, that's the Liberals need some strategic help in addition to candidate help.
Yeah, some strategic help, and you've got to think, David, that this is a moment of soul searching for the party. What does the next leader look like? Because we've already established that Kevin Vickers will not be the leader continuing. I don't know when exactly he'll step down. Maybe we'll get details on that when he does speak, and we're just waiting on him to speak. But what kind of a rebrand, or how... Sorry, I was going to ask you about the rebrand, but let's go right now to Kevin Vickers.
My friends, earlier tonight I called Mr. Higgs to congratulate him. I indicated that the Liberal Party intend to work collaboratively in the Legislative Assembly in order to better the lives of all New Brunswickers across our beautiful province. Plus tôt dans la soirée, j'ai appelé M. Higgs pour le féliciter. J'ai indiqué que le Parti libéral avait l'intention de travailler en collaboration à l'Assemblée législative afin d'améliorer la vie de tous les New Brunswickois et New Brunswickoises. These are not the results we were hoping for. I'm sorry that we did not win this election for the strong, positive values that we share. Ce soir, je vous demande de continuer à croire en nos valeurs libérales. Le Nouveau-Brunswick a besoin de vous maintenant plus que jamais. L'heure n'est pas à la peur et à la division. Le moment est venu de montrer au monde et qu'on travaille en commun pour accomplir. Nord, Sud, région urbaine et rurale, anglophone, francophone, autochtone, LGBTQ, nous sommes tous des New Brunswickois ou New Brunswickoises. Et nous méritons tous d'être traités de façon juste et équilibre. Tonight, I ask that you continue to believe in our liberal values. New Brunswick needs you now more than ever. Now is not a time for fear or division. Now is a time to show the world what working together can accomplish. North, South, urban, rural, English and French, Indigenous, and our LGBTQ community. We are all New Brunswickers, and we all deserve to be treated fairly and equally. Malgré les résultats ce soir, j'espère que l'avenir de notre province sera brillant. Il reste encore beaucoup de travail à faire pour faire croître notre économie, protéger notre environnement et combler le fossé entre les gens de Nouveau-Brunswick. Mais je sais qu'en travaillant ensemble, nous redonnerons de l'espoir et des possibilités à tous les New-Brunswickois et New-Brunswickoises dans tous les coins de cette belle province. In spite of tonight's result, I'm hopeful that the future of our province will be a bright one. There's still a lot of work to do in order to grow our economy, protect our environment, and heal the divide between New Brunswickers. But I know that by working together, we will bring back hope and opportunity for all New Brunswickers in every corner of this beautiful province. I am grateful to each and every one of you for supporting me through this campaign. Thank you for everything you've done and everything you will continue to do. I would like to thank each and every one of you who took the time to vote despite this global pandemic. Your voice is being heard and it's strengthening our democracy. Je tiens à remercier chacune d'entre vous d'être allé voter malgré cette pandémie mondiale. Votre voix est entendue et elle renforce notre démocratie. Thank you to all Liberal candidates who ran in this campaign, but also to every one of you who stepped up and put their name on the ballot. Public service comes with challenges, but I know that we'll have the common goal of building a better province for New Brunswick. We might not all see eye to eye on how to get there, but I know that we can only get there by working together. Merci à toutes les personnes qui sont présentées sous la bannière libérale durant cette campagne, mais aussi à tous ceux et celles qui ont mis leur nom sur le bulletin de vote. Servir la population comporte des défis, mais je sais que nous avons toutes et nous pouvons et tous pour objectif commun de bâtir une meilleure province pour les New-Brunswickois et les New-Brunswickoises. Nous ne sommes peut-être pas tous d'accord sur la façon d'y parvenir, mais je sais que nous ne pouvons y arriver qu'en travaillant ensemble. Thank you to the volunteers across the province who helped spread our message and hope and collaboration. This election has been very different from the ones we saw in the past. You were able to adapt quickly to these new realities. We stayed positive and ran the best campaign anybody could have ever expected or wanted. Merci aux bénévoles de toutes les provinces qui ont contribué à diffuser notre message d'espoir et la collaboration. I also want to thank my wife and my family for their unconditional love and support. This election has been quite the journey, and having you by my side meant everything to me. I know that many of you are disappointed by the results, and I take full responsibility for it. As a result, I will be resigning as leader of the Liberal Party of New Brunswick. Under the leadership of a new leader, I know that the Liberal Party will continue to be a strong voice for all New Brunswickers. Je sais que beaucoup d'entre vous sont déçus par les résultats et j'assume l'entière responsabilité. En conséquence, je remets ma démission en tant que chef du Parti libéral du Nouveau-Brunswick. Sous la direction de nouveaux chefs et de nouvelles chefs, je sais que le Parti libéral continuera à être une voix forte pour tous les New-Brunswickois et New-Brunswickoises. Merci, chers amis. Je vous... vous me manquera. Il me manquera. Merci.
Okay, we have been listening there to Liberal Leader Kevin Vickers giving his speech. A tough night for Kevin Vickers and for the Liberal Party. So you heard him just in the last couple of moments of that speech say that he will be resigning. He takes full responsibility for the party's loss. The question that still hasn't been answered there is when he will be resigning. So hopefully we can try to figure that out through the course of tonight. But it may be a question for tomorrow and for the next several days. So Liberal Leader Kevin Vickers will be stepping aside. The Liberal Party doing a lot of soul searching on this evening. We have now locked in results for all ridings in this race. So let's have a look at the final one. We were waiting on 2 polls to report in Carleton, Victoria, and we can tell you that the results will stand. Margaret Johnson will be the PC MLA for this riding. That leaves the PCs with 27, the Liberals with 17. The Greens hold on to all 3 of their seats. The People's Alliance lose 1 and drop back to 2. So these are the places where the PCs picked up seats from the Liberals in Moncton East. Danielle Lalande will be headed to the legislature. Another riding in Moncton. This has been a real battleground tonight. Greg Turner will be headed to the legislature as MLA, and the Liberals lose this one. That was Kathy Rogers' seat. St. John Harbour was a very close race in 2018. Not so close this time. Arlene Dunn walks away with the victory. She will be headed to the legislature, along with colleague Jill Green in Fredericton North, who takes this one from Stephen Horseman, who drops back to 3rd. So just an example of how poorly the Liberals did overall this evening. And here's another race that the Liberals lost by 391 votes. Margaret Johnson in Carleton, Victoria, as we talked about. So Andrew Harvey will not be headed back to the legislature. Kevin Vickers will not be headed to the legislature. And as I talked about before, there will be some soul searching for the Liberal Party in the coming days, to be sure. You're watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. We're going to take another break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. I want to send things back to Quispamsis, where our legislature reporter Silas Brown spoke with Premier Blaine Higgs a little earlier on. Take a listen.
Thanks, Sarah. I am here with Premier Blaine Higgs, who has just been reelected. And you just addressed the crowd here. Obviously, it's as you mentioned during your speech, it's not the normal sort of crowd you would see at a victory rally here. But you spoke a lot about the need to kind of unite the province here. Well, we didn't see your party make too many forays into the northern part of the province. So talk to me about that job of still letting people know in areas of the province who didn't vote for you that you are going to be there to be their premier and represent them.
Well, I certainly made that clear in my speech about I'm representing the whole province when I'm premier, and that's the role of a premier. So it doesn't depend on where the seats are. It depends on that we're all part of New Brunswick and at the end of an election. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that we've seen political divides in the province, and that's what I believe that parties have taken advantage of that over the years, and we see that has happened in the last 3-4 elections. I ran a campaign that was fair and equitable across the province. I mean, that was my goal. I had a plan we put forward with the team back in March. We stuck to that plan, and I didn't make. I made a lot of stops, but I didn't make promises at all these stops, and I just wasn't on that typical promise bus. But I do promise a better outcome for our province in its entirety. And so I think I'm hopeful that this gets beyond politics and people say, we need to be part of it. We had some great candidates running. It's unfortunate to see them not make the grade because wonderful representatives that I hope will be able to continue to offer their services to the province. We've got some new people in the system, which is great to see too. 2 new ridings from Moncton, so that's great to see. And I guess we picked up we picked up a number of new seats, so it's good. But we're here for the whole province.
Now, your pitch to voters really was that you needed a majority for stability, to do the hard work going forward to recover from the COVID pandemic, to deal with a potential second wave here. But, why did you need that majority? And now that you have it, what are you going to do with it? What is a Blaine Higgs majority government going to look like?
Well, I think what it allows now, so we do have stability. We're not going to be in a position that if the circumstances arise that the opposition would just take us out, and regardless of what the health concerns might be, because that's where it was the concern. It certainly was the fact that if we need to in a second wave, we have serious. I hope to keep the COVID committee still performing as it did, because I think that was helpful. There were other items that I tried to put forward as a cabinet committee group of multiple parties that didn't work out so well, and because it was and the Liberals chose not to participate in that. So I guess now, we have some challenges. We've talked about challenges for a long time about maintaining and protecting our healthcare services, and in the the issue around the nurse or the emergency rooms, we got that sorted out, right? And so there's no change to nursing home or emergency room hours. But the program of understanding how we can better serve our citizens going forward and utilize both facilities and people is real. And every one of those communities that we went through that issue before came with a survey that basically said, just let us help. We know we have challenges, but let us be part of the solution. That's certainly a very reasonable request, and shame on us for not allowing that to be part of that. And that's what we'll do everywhere. We have challenges, but we're not afraid to say, here it is. Here's everything we know, because there's nothing to hide. So my point now is we don't have a situation where an opposition is going to oppose just for the sake of it and threaten to take us out of government. We have a situation where we can lay all the cards on the table and say, okay, how do we work together to fix it? That's what's different.
Now, I want to pick up on, you mentioned that the COVID Cabinet Committee, you're hoping to continue that. How much collaboration are you hoping to have in the legislature with the opposition leaders? Obviously, Mr. Coon of the Greens and Mr. Austin of the Alliance are back. Are you hoping to find areas where there can still be collaboration,
Absolutely.
even though you have a majority government?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's part of governing in today's world. It's people, and I think the population have spoken to us about, they've elected the three Greens. They elected two PAs back. So certainly they recognize that there's a need to have a difference of opinion, and we need to respect that and recognize the voters that have put that forward. And I'd like to think there's many areas that we've already demonstrated a lot of movement in the directions of what people have been asking for from any party. And sure, we need to do more of that.
Perfect. Well, I'll let you go now, and that is Premier Blaine Higgs, who has just been given a majority government here, and we are here in Quispamsis at PCHQ. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Silas. That's Silas Brown. He's been in Quispamsis for us all evening. We're going to take another quick break here. You're watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. We've heard from the party leaders. Now I want to send things back to Fredericton, where our Callum Smith is standing by at Green Party headquarters, and he caught up a little earlier this evening with Green MP Jenica Atwin.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm here with Green MP Jenica Atwin. Jenica, first of all, what are your thoughts on how things went tonight so far?
Well, I'm certainly happy to see our three incredible MLAs returning to the legislature, including the leader, David Coon. It's always a good day in Fred South when David Coon gets elected. So I'm happy. I'm pleased for my friends and my colleagues. Certainly would have liked to see a couple more seats be picked up around the province, but we can't be disappointed with those numbers. Some second places across the riding, the popular vote increase, so that momentum is there, and we're very happy as Greens tonight.
And you mentioned the popular vote bump. I feel like there was a sense of momentum, as Mr. Coon referenced earlier today. He referenced that up and down. And at this point, we don't know yet how much that momentum paid off at this point. With three, at least right now, what do you make of the Green momentum moving forward?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping that it's going to encourage other people to get involved, to volunteer in a campaign, to maybe step up to be a candidate. It's all part of that momentum piece. I'm so proud of the work that Luke Randall put in. That was, I think, an exemplary campaign across the province. I think it stands out among the top. So many other amazing people step forward. And so I think that it's only going to continue to grow. And that's really what we hope for. And we always say that one win for a Green is a win for us all. So there's some happy people across the province because of our three Green MLAs.
That's Fredericton MP Jenica Atwin. Sarah, I will throw it back to you.
Thanks so much. Callum Smith at Green Party headquarters. And then just across town, our reporter Travis Fortnum is at People's Alliance headquarters this evening. And he caught up with Sterling Wright, the People's Alliance Chief of Staff, earlier this evening as well.
I'm here with Sterling Wright, who was a founding member of the People's Alliance Party, now Chris Austin's Chief of Staff. Sterling, thank you for talking to us. So you clearly have a little bit of experience here in the field. Tell us a bit about your experience.
I've been with Chris and the People's Alliance since it was founded in 2010. Prior to that, I was involved in several elections, federally and provincially, primarily as progressive conservative. Had a few kicks at the can.
So all those elections under your belt, how was this one different? Obviously, you've got the pandemic. How different was it?
Very different. It was a lot of challenge just to get the message out. You couldn't have the rallies. You couldn't do the door-to-door. We found the media, especially the print media, to be a little more hostile than usual. It was a challenge, and I congratulate Mr. Higgs on his win. I look forward to seeing how he makes out going forward. He certainly has some challenges ahead of him. We're interested in seeing how he makes out.
Yeah, so a bit of a mixed bag of emotions tonight, I'm guessing, because...
for sure, we're disappointed. We know that we had some very, very good candidates, and we'd certainly hope that they would do better, but at the end of the day, you have to respect the decision of voters, and I certainly do. And we'll see what the next one brings.
Exactly. And there's a lot of excitement in the room with Michelle Conroy. Obviously, this big win over Kevin Vickers. People are calling her the Dragon Slayer.
Well, she is a Dragon Slayer. And as for her win tonight, none of us were surprised by that in the least. She's an extremely hard worker. She's very personable. The people on the river love her. They have an excellent MLA, and they made the right choice, in my humble opinion.
That's perfect. So where does the party go from here? What comes next?
Well, we have a strong base, and we'll build on that base. As I said before we went on camera, the province faces a lot of challenges, a lot of really serious challenges. Mr. Higgs has asked for a majority. Voters have given that majority. And we look forward to seeing how he makes out with that going forward. And hopefully, for the sake of the province, we certainly hope he does a good job. But I think he's going to give us lots of opportunities to comment on his decisions going forward. And it'll remain to be seen if voters are as enamored with him in 2 years as they are tonight. My guess is they won't be, but I could be wrong. We'll see what happens.
Like you say, that we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
Sarah, we'll send it back to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Travis Fortnum at People's Alliance headquarters this evening. Callum Smith, as we mentioned, was at Green Party headquarters this evening. He caught up with the Green campaign manager just a little earlier.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm here with Green Party campaign manager and the party's executive director, Marco Morency. Marco, thank you for joining us tonight. I want to start first. How is campaigning this year? Obviously, we've heard it before. It's campaigning during campaigning during COVID. How has it impacted the Green Party?
It's impacted in so many ways. We had to think about everything twice and more. Right? We couldn't have big events where you could feel the energy with everything, a lot of people. So that kind of, there was a challenge. But on the other side, we are people that are used to deal with very few resources, right? So we got the creativity out, different kind of signs came up. So we played with it. And I think that, I hope that, that worked out pretty well. But it was a challenge for sure.
What were some of the things we know, pop-up events for the Greens? How, to the audience, how was it different? What looked different, I guess, in terms of how you approached voters or how you didn't?
We always had this pandemic behind our heads, right? Every move, we need a mask. Did we think about this? It was less like, the checklist is quite long. Now it was triple that. Right, you really needed to be cautious. We really wanted to pay attention not to contaminate anyone, not be responsible for a second wave. So everybody was super stressed. There was a lot of stress into it and a lot more work. Even just getting the campaign office, right, the registry list and all those things, wiping down everything. The amount of work was just really a lot more. It was a lot more.
Right. And for yourself, when you were campaigning in the riding of Edmonton-Madawaska Centre, what was that like for you?
Well, I was the campaign manager for the province, so I didn't have the chance. I wish I would. I didn't have the chance to campaign at all in my riding. I'm from Edmundston, so I wanted to offer the people of Edmundston the chance to vote, other than the traditional parties, right? So that's what I did. But we helped every other campaign to deal with the COVID with protocols, really intense protocols. So that's the way we provided help.
And just lastly on that note, Marco, is there anything you left on the table? Is there any regrets about the campaign and how things panned out?
I'm really sorry that we don't have a proportional representation because we have 15% of the vote. Still, we only have three MLAs, so that's my disappointment. But on the other side, we had presence all across the province. We've built infrastructure, human infrastructure everywhere. We have teams. We had great campaigns. I think we're second in 10 riding, which is a great showing for us. And also, we are present in Anglophone community, in the Francophone community. I think that means a lot. We're really a New Brunswick party, and I hope we can build on this because we definitely need to build bridge between the two communities.
Thank you very much, Marco.
You're welcome.
That is Green Party Campaign Manager and Executive Director Marco Morency. Sarah, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Callum. You're watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. We will be right back. Good evening. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick, and welcome to our regular viewers of Global News at 11. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, the people of New Brunswick have elected a progressive conservative majority government. A victory for Premier Blaine Higgs has come at the cost of the Liberals, who've lost this election and will lose their leader. We'll have more on that coming up. But first, let's take a look at how things stand at the end of the election tonight. These are the ridings that, these are the final standings, rather. The PCs have 27 MLAs, the Liberals just 17, so they've lost 3. The Greens hold on to all 3 of their MLAs and get everybody re-elected. The People's Alliance just re-electing 2, but one of them is Michelle Conroy in Miramichi. She takes that seat from Kevin Vickers, the leader of the Liberal Party. There are 9 PC women elected this evening. 5 of them are actually rookie MLAs. That's an interesting storyline we'll get to in a moment. Here's how the popular vote shook out this evening. The Progressive Conservatives taking 39% of the popular vote. The Liberals well back of where they were in 2018 even, with 34%. The Greens made some gains to 15%. The People's Alliance back to 9%. I want to bring in David Akin. He is our chief political correspondent at Global News. Taking a closer look, David, at the Progressive Conservative win tonight. At the beginning of our election coverage at 8 o'clock this evening, you and I talked about the path to victory for the Progressive Conservatives. What did it look like?
Well, this is the 2018 electoral map. All the blue down here. The key for Blaine Higgs and the Progressive Conservatives was to push this line north, with one exception. And let's take a look at what happened. This is tonight, and look at that. We do have a lot more blue north, with, as I say, one exception. We'll get to that. This Shippagan riding, which was blue in 2018, it goes back to the Liberals, but by and large, a very successful night for Blaine Higgs and the PC to just try and push a little bit further north, and that's where their majority won. One of the big wins is going to be in Moncton East, and if we take a look at the results in Moncton East, that's where Daniel Alain is the new Progressive Conservative MLA. Daniel Alain, parle français, is a French speaker first and foremost. Look for him to go into Blaine Higgs' cabinet. He beat the incumbent Liberal Monique LeBlanc. In Moncton South, another win at the Liberals' expense. Tyson Milner loses. He was the Liberal incumbent. Greg Turner, Progressive Conservative, is the winner. St. John Harbour, this was the one exception I've been talking about when I said about my move north. This was just get down there and take away that seat. Liberals won by just 8 votes in 2018. This time, not close. Arlene Dunn wins for the Tories in St. John Harbour. Freddie York, Fredericton York. Rick DeSaulnier, the People's Alliance, finished 3rd. He was the incumbent, and voters in Freddie York said no thanks. They picked Ryan Collins, the Progressive Conservative, with 42%. And finally, and also Fredericton North, this was a dogfight really between the Greens and the Progressive Conservatives. The incumbent Liberal Stephen Horseman wasn't a factor. In the end, Jill Green, the blue candidate, wins, beating Luke Randall, the green candidate. So there we have it. Those are the big ones. And one last one we didn't talk about there. Carleton Victoria was the other pickup for the PCs. Margaret Johnson beating Andrew Harvey. That was a rematch from 2018 when Harvey got the best of Johnson. But there you go. Those were the pickups. PCs lost 1, Shippagan, but they picked up 6. Net result is they're +5 from 2018. You're following along there, everybody? Got it. 27 seats in the legislature for the PCs in Blaine Higgs. That's a comfortable majority.
All right, thanks so much, David. That is Chief Political Correspondent David Akin in Ottawa for us this evening, breaking down exactly how the PCs got to a majority government. A little earlier tonight, Premier Blaine Higgs spoke to his supporters. Here's just a little bit of what he had to say about his party's success.
We will make sure no New Brunswicker is left behind. Together we will recover. Together we will realize our potential. And together we will rise to new heights. I am sure the best is yet to come, and we are up to the job to deliver. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
All right, that was Premier Blaine Higgs addressing his supporters in Quispam-Sis this evening, and you can see the PC party has gained more votes tonight than they did in 2018. You can see that they took some of those votes away from the Liberals, and you've got to think they took some away as well from the People's Alliance, who lose some support. The Greens gain some support this evening, but only hold on to just 3 seats. Our Silas Brown has been covering the Progressive Conservative campaign tonight from Quispam-Sis. Silas, there is a little bit of disappointment at the PC camp. It's hard to believe tonight because they didn't have as good a showing as they would have liked in those French-speaking ridings in the province's north.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. I spent some time talking to a party insider a little while ago, and as David Akin mentioned, there were some gains from the PCs in some French-speaking areas, you know, around Moncton and around Fredericton. They pushed north, but they failed to capture any majority Francophone ridings. Now, the insider that I talked to really thought that the 2 Madawaska ridings were very much in play for the PCs, and there is some disappointment disappointment there that they weren't able to pick those up. Now, the party's still going to be shut out of the majority Francophone ridings, but this insider thinks that over the next 4 years, the party is going to have a very good shot to prove to Francophones that the party is not the party of Anglophones and that Blaine Higgs is not an anti-Francophone premier. Now, David Akin also mentioned Daniel Hélin in Moncton East, and this insider mentioned him as a potential rising star who could end up with a decent cabinet post, and Hélin's background as the formerly involved with NB Liquor, and he started his career in politics as an assistant to an executive assistant to the former premier Bernard Lord, who was the last premier, coincidentally, to repeat and win a second term. Back to you, Sarah.
Okay, thanks so much, Silas. That's Silas Brown. He's been live at in Quispamsis at PC Party headquarters. Obviously, a very different night for the Liberals. We already told you that Leader Kevin Vickers did not win his seat. He gave a speech a little earlier this evening. He took full responsibility for the loss and said he will be stepping down. Here he was in Miramichi speaking just a short time ago.
I also want to thank my wife and my family for their unconditional love and support. This election has been quite the journey, and having you by my side meant everything to me. I know that many of you are disappointed by the results, and I take full responsibility for it. As a result, I will be resigning as leader of the Liberal Party of New Brunswick. Under the leadership of a new leader, I know that the Liberal Party will continue to be a strong voice for all New Brunswickers.
Okay, and here's what happened in Miramichi, where Kevin Vickers, as you can see, failed to win a seat, and by a wide margin, Michelle Conroy takes that seat for the People's Alliance. She was a pretty popular constituency MLA in this riding with a 1,200 vote lead over Kevin Vickers, a big win for the Alliance tonight. Our Shelley Steeves has been covering the Liberal campaign tonight from Fredericton. And Shelley, we were actually expecting Kevin Vickers to be there to give some sort of a speech tonight. He didn't make the trip.
No, he didn't. He stayed in Miramichi, and it was an extremely difficult night, obviously, for Kevin Vickers tonight. In fact, the entire campaign has been hard on him. He struggled to connect with voters. He struggled to compete with that growing popularity of Blaine Higgs amid COVID-19. I think this election really came down to who did people trust the most to lead them through a possible second phase of the pandemic as well as economic recovery. Clearly, the choice was Blaine Higgs. Now, Kevin Vickers also lost by a large majority, as you mentioned, in his own riding, more than 1,000 votes, incredibly disappointing there. And as a result, he did step down as leader. So the party itself will have to go through, I guess, some soul searching in their search for a new leader. Now, supporters are hoping that he stays on in some capacity to support the party, but he says he ran because he wanted to bring the province together, particularly the northern Francophone portion of the province with the south. He says he wants to continue to do that, but it just won't be in the political realm. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Shelley. That is Shelley Steeves live for us in Fredericton this evening. Also in Fredericton tonight, our Callum Smith has been covering the Green campaign. And the Greens hold on to all three of the ridings they held heading into tonight, Callum, but they weren't able to make the gains in any other ridings that they were hoping for.
You're right, Sarah. The Greens returning Fredericton South MLA and leader David Coon to the legislature alongside Megan Mitten, Memram Cook Tantramar, and Kevin Arsenault in Kent North. That sounds like good news for the Greens, but David Coon earlier today said anything short of seat gains is a loss, essentially. So that's really the challenge they're up against at this point. Obviously, with a PC majority government, that makes things much more challenging for a party with less candidates, with less MLAs in the legislature to really change or make change, I guess, with the majority. So that's probably a point of concern for the Green Party, Sarah. But I do know at the same time, Jenica Atwin, the Green MP for Fredericton, insists the momentum for the Greens is growing in the region. Obviously, we heard the popular vote is increasing, but also there are several things David Coon mentioned in his speech at the end of the night. One, that he would still push, and the Green Party would still push for an inquiry into systemic racism in the province's justice system and law enforcement systems. That was one priority that he mentioned. He also mentioned, like Kevin Vickers, bringing the North and South together. He insisted, though, that despite the majority government, he would still have a say in the legislature. Sarah, I guess only time will tell at this point, but I'll throw it back to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Callum. That is Callum Smith live from Fredericton this evening. You are watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. We have more after the break. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020 and this very special election edition of Global News at 11. I want to bring in Lori Turnbull. She's the director of the School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University, who's been joining us all night from Ottawa. We've been watching all of these results come in. And Lori, one of the topics we haven't gotten to yet is how will this majority government for Blaine Higgs impact federal-provincial relations for New Brunswick?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, Premier Higgs knows that he's got a little bit of a stronger position in terms of leverage, and there's always a bit of tension, a little bit of back and forth between the federal government and the provincial governments, and I think now it's going to be interesting to see how the federal government moves its agenda forward and how it goes back and forth with the provinces. So, you know, before all this happened, and it seems like years ago now, but it was actually only November in 2019, when after electing a minority government, the Prime Minister appointed Chrystia Freeland as his Minister of Intergovernmental Relations, or Intergovernmental Affairs. And now that's changed. Obviously, COVID has changed everything and has completely changed a lot of the federal government's priorities. They're now focusing on these, allegedly, you know, like we'll see more in the speech from the throne next week, but these huge, you know, potentially huge pieces on basic income, changes to EI, you know, major pieces that could amount to a significant shift to the left. And so also in that time, Minister Freeland has taken over the finance portfolio after Minister Morneau resigned. And now Dominic LeBlanc from New Brunswick is the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister. So I'm really interested to see how Premier Higgs plays that space, because when he first became Premier, he was quite hard on the feds, right? Like, he really pushed back, and he was trying to kind of get the province's books in order and really positioned himself as, listen, the federal government has a role to play in helping New Brunswick get back on track. And so I'm wondering how he's going to play that space now. And it'd be very interesting to see how he navigates that relationship with Minister LeBlanc.
Yeah, it'll absolutely be interesting to see how this shakes out in the next couple of weeks, Lori. And one of the things that struck me as you were talking about that relationship between Premier Higgs and the federal government is that one of the issues that was really contentious at the beginning of his time in office was that of the carbon tax. And then after the federal election, we saw Premier Higgs say, okay, we're going to take a step back and kind of reassess, because now at this point, most New Brunswickers in the provincial and federal elections have voted for a party that supports a carbon tax. So we're going to submit our proposal to the federal government. So he's shown his willingness to move, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, he's always struck me as the kind of politician who's not terribly dogmatic or ideological or partisan. He struck me as somebody who looks at the situation in front of him and is kind of a get her done kind of guy. And so we'll see how he ends up navigating that. And you're right. I mean, I think when he sees that things have they're going a certain way in terms of support for the carbon tax, and obviously, we've heard a lot of talk out of Ottawa about shifting toward a greener economy, and that being a big part of building back after COVID. And so the premiers are going to have to figure out how they interact with one another, and then how they as a group interact with the Prime Minister on issues like that. And I think a lot of what the federal government wants to do is going to require collaboration and some buy-in, some investment, some input from the provinces.
Okay, thank you so much for your insight and analysis all evening long, Lori. That is Lori Turnbull. She's been joining us this evening from Ottawa. I want to head back to Fredericton now, where Ross Lord is standing by. And Ross, healthcare is a perennial issue in any provincial election, and it came up in kind of an interesting way, in a controversial way, in this election in particular.
Yeah, and it's something that's easy to overlook, Sarah, because most Canadians thought this issue was resolved. And Don, the issue I'm referring to is abortion, but it hasn't been resolved here, and Premier Higgs' position is controversial.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Liberal Party, led by Kevin Vickers, said that it would fund abortions performed at the private clinic. That has been on the feminist wish list for a very long time, for decades even. But both parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, dragged their feet. The Liberals just wanted it to go away. But to Kevin Vickers' credit, he said, no, we are a Liberal Party. We will honour the Canada Health Act. We will fund abortions performed at a private clinic. Justin Trudeau weighed into the issue in the last federal election, saying that he would enforce the federal Canada Health Act, saying, no, New Brunswick, if you don't, you're losing money. We're going to claw back the transfer payments. But Blaine Higgs said no, he's happy with the status quo. The status quo is that some hospitals do perform abortions, not all hospitals, not conveniently located, meaning women have to travel. It's not an ideal situation. Every other province makes funding available to abortions performed at a private clinic, but Blaine Higgs, who has described abortion as a social degradation, has said no. He's happy with the status quo. It will not happen. And he's defied New Brunswickers to take the province to court.
So he has an image, and probably justified, as a pragmatic leader. But on this issue, he's dug in his heels. He's ideologically opposed. So does that put him on a collision course with the federal government? Is this a landmine for Blaine Higgs?
Well, it could be. I mean, I would like to see Justin Trudeau and the federal government actually enforce the Canada Health Act and compel the province to honour that requirement. But again, he'll just play it out in the courts, as many premiers have done in the past.
So maybe the federal government would just as soon not take him on, or anyone on that issue publicly as well.
Yeah, you're quite right about that.
Okay, so far that position has not cost him, and we see the evidence tonight with a majority. So, but something to watch out for. There are so many issues within healthcare, and that's one of them, which is a bit of an anomaly here in New Brunswick.
We run a safe, healthy election, and the Premier who wins tonight doesn't honour the Canada Health Act when it comes to women's reproductive rights.
There you go. Some irony for you. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ross. That is Global National Correspondent Ross Lord standing by in Fredericton with University of New Brunswick political scientist Don Wright. You are watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. We'll take another short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020 as we continue coverage of this country's first election in the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's head over to our Toronto studio, bring in Tracy Tong. Tracy, we heard Premier Higgs say to his supporters earlier tonight that this was proof that a pandemic election can happen and that it can happen safely.
That's right, Sarah. He did say that, but we do have to remember that the cases in New Brunswick have been very low. The numbers anyway, transmission and infection rates have been very low. And when you compare that to the rest of the country, well, that doesn't really translate in every single province across Canada. Before we get into that with Mercedes Stephenson, I do want to bring up some reaction that we have been getting from the federal level, including a tweet tonight from federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, and that reads in part, huge congratulations to Blaine Higgs on being re-elected Premier of New Brunswick with a strong Conservative majority government. Looking forward to continuing to work together. New Brunswickers are in good hands. That was followed by a statement from the Prime Minister, and that reads in part, on behalf of the Government of Canada, I congratulate Blaine Higgs on his re-election as Premier. I look forward to working closely with the provincial government as we recover from the global COVID-19 pandemic. Together, we will continue to safely restart the economy and lay the groundwork to keep New Brunswick communities strong and healthy. Let's bring in Mercedes Stephenson, now our Ottawa Bureau Chief, to talk about all of this. Now, Mercedes, we did hear Blaine Higgs say tonight that this is proof that a pandemic election can be held safely. But again, what does that mean for the rest of the country? Provinces that are looking now at holding an election in the coming months. And of course, we all know that a federal collapse is very possible as well.
I think that certainly at the provincial level, it emboldens governments that may want to go to the polls to seek a majority mandate. For example, John Horgan out in BC, although there have been much higher COVID rates and COVID transmission rates there, it does show you can, in fact, have an election during a pandemic, and you can do so without the voters necessarily punishing you for it. Federal elections are different because there's a bigger scale in terms of where the leaders have to travel, although at this point it would likely be virtual. But there's no question that this has Elections Canada looking closely at how you would do things like, for example, more advanced voting to try to distribute the number of voters so not everybody is showing up at the same day at the same time, how you prevent the transmission with lots of hand sanitizer and different pencils for people to fill out their ballots, all of those questions going ahead. But I think for incumbent governments watching this tonight, certainly the temptation is higher to go to the polls if they want to seek a majority mandate, whether that is federal or provincial.
All right, lots to be dissected and to be learned from tonight. Thank you so much for that, Mercedes. Back to you, Sarah.
Okay, thanks so much. That is Tracy Tong, our Global News at 11 anchor. She has been joining us all evening. You're watching Decision New Brunswick 2020. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Decision New Brunswick 2020. You're taking a look at the standings at the end of the night. The Progressive Conservatives taking 6 seats from the Liberals and 1 from the People's Alliance to form government, a majority government with 27 seats. Now, just a short time ago, our Silas Brown chatted with the newly elected MLA-elect for Hampton, Gary Crossman, about the PC's strong showing tonight. Silas.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm here with Hampton MLA Gary Crossman, who just recently walked into PC HQ in Quispamsis here. So you weren't too far away.
No, that's right, close.
This is the 3rd time you've been re-elected in Hampton. Tell me a little bit about how different this was this time around, this election.
So it was different without doing the door-to-door, which we're used to from the last 2 times. We managed through social media. We managed through our past experience dealing with people on the ground. We got a lot of contacts through our convenience stores, through the riding. It's a vast riding. It's a rural riding. A lot of people, main concern was internet upgrades that's needed for people working in small business from home, high school students working with laptops at home. They need that done. Different. We didn't even open our office. We kept it closed to the public because we didn't want to, look after all those COVID guidelines without the appropriate staff. We sent out a mail out early on, which hit our seniors and those without social media. And also on that contact number was the cell phone, was my cell phone. So when they contacted the office, they contacted me.
So, you talked about this. You had to be a little bit different in your strategy to get out there. Was there any difficulty in getting out the vote today? I mean, obviously things went very well for you, but was it different, not being able to identify door to door people as you were campaigning?
It was different, but we approached it this time around from the the lawn signs, the signage. Our identified voters last time around, we had a lot of signs, probably close to 600. So with the signage comes your support, and we started with the calls for that way, and the more and more people would see the signs are out, people wanted to get on board. They supported what we did in the past. A lot of good support with Premier Higgs this time around with the COVID, how he handled the COVID crisis, pandemic, and bringing the leaders on board. There's a lot of respect for the Premier for doing that, and I guess the ballot question in a lot of people's minds was, who do you want to lead the province in the next 4 years? And that helped us as well.
Now, other than that, obviously the pandemic in the back mind of many people, who was going to continue to lead the province, what were some of the other things that you heard as you were interacting with people about top priorities that you're going to bring to the table in this majority government?
I mentioned the internet one. That's a big one for rural. That was overwhelming by support by everybody, young and old alike. We have the multi-purpose facility for the Hampton region. We've been trying for years to get. The funding isn't there the way it looks right now, but through the RDC we've met with local MLAs and MP and the regional facility committee itself, and they're going back and forth to try to make the budget that fits everybody, provincial, municipal, and federal.
Well, thank you very much for doing this, Gary. I'll let you go get back to the party, and congratulations.
Okay, thank you.
And that's Gary Crossman here at PCHQ in Quispamsis. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Silas. Well, that is it for us tonight. You've been watching Decision New Brunswick 2020, the first election in this country during the COVID-19 pandemic. A big thanks to our team across New Brunswick and across the country, both in front of and behind the cameras tonight. It's been a very different election night for all of us as well. On behalf of everyone here, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. Take care. Have a great night. Global News is now projecting a progressive conservative majority government this evening.
Tonight we find ourselves with more certainty than ever before. It's a certainty that comes from knowing New Brunswickers want us to seize the momentum that we have right now and keep building.